Today is the 5th day of our academic program, and today we are going to present three different papers, and the first paper is going to be presented by Dr. Amit De. Second paper is going to be presented by Dr. Ulrich Martinson, and the third paper is by Dr. Abhishek Ghosh. So the topic of the first paper is Perspective of Folk Culture and Folk Religion in Colonial Bengal. Second paper is Significance of India, Interpreting Islamic Literary Genres as Forms of Ontology, Epistemology and Natural Law History. And the third paper is South Asian Studies, Interdisciplinary Research Methods. So in conformity to the program we have designed for research methodology, all the three papers are highly significant and important, because yesterday, by this time, we already have listened to two different lectures which covers the aspect of folklore and folkloristics. So today, we are going to listen to a paper on folk culture and folk religion in the perspective of colonial Bengal. So this is a very important part of our Indian history. And the second paper by Dr. Ulrich Martinson, she will be presenting a paper on interpreting Islamic literary genres with reference to epistemology and natural history theory. So this is again another important paper on natural history. And the third paper is South Asian Studies Interdisciplinary Research Method. So we are much acquainted with the interdisciplinary research methods, and we came to know a lot about the interdisciplinary research methods, but the focus of this paper is South Asian Studies. So this is another important aspect, South Asian Studies. So we are waiting for our speaker, first speaker, Dr. Amit De, to join. Tindi Madam, Amit De, whether he has joined?
Yes, sir. Actually, sir is trying to connect, but he is facing internet issues. So I would like to request our participants to kindly bear with us. So we can wait for sir for 2-3 minutes more. In between, I think that he will be able to.
Okay. So we can continue. We can continue till he join. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that would be nice, because and by this time I would like to say something about the entire program, the entire program on research methodology that the four noted organizations, BRC, St. Xavier's College, and Sri Jagannath Research Center, St. Paul's Cathedral Mission College, and Stockholme University, Sweden. So perhaps this is first time, at least in my experience, that a conference, a workshop, 5-day workshop is being held in collaboration with 4 different institutions. They have collaborated and they want to present some major issues, challenging issues of research methodology to strengthen our technical, methodological and conceptual sense to deal with research projects or to deal with research activities in this new millennium, because this is a new millennium, not only a new century. We have stepped into a new millennium also. So perhaps this note is very significant for in the history of the methodology, in the history of dealing with the subject methodology. Suppose writing books on methodology is one aspect, and dealing with workshop and seminars, so this is another aspect. So by this time, during the last 4 days, we have listened to many papers through which we came to know the the necessity of research method. That is not a new concept, why we need methodology to do research, but some of the very core issues, some of the very upcoming issues, new issues have been addressed. One among them, just I can remember, one is gender issue. This is very important issue in contemporary world, in contemporary sociology as well. Because what we understand with reference to gender, I can comment that what we understand as mainstream culture is somehow male stream culture. So there is a vertical difference, even in culture, there is a vertical difference between the two genders. So this has to be addressed in new millennium, because when we talk about equality, another paper has addressed about equality. Okay, so far equality is concerned, so this equality in the field of gender, in the concept of gender, in the aspect of gender, is also essential in contemporary academic. That is one point. And another very significant point was colonial India. So in their papers, many research scholars have addressed the case of colonial India. This is important because colonial period is a very significant phase of Indian history, because after medieval period we have completed the bhakti movement, the movement of Sri Chaitanya. In 16th century we had a movement of Sri Chaitanya, that is Vaishnava movement. I would rather love to say it was a religious and cultural movement. So after that, the phase of Mangala Kavyas, post Chaitanya period, it continued in different way. But after the arrival of the British in Indian context, we have seen that there were several technical and structural change, functional change in the running of the society. Okay, by this time Professor Amit Dey has come. I would like to welcome Professor Amit Dey to deliver his speech, and welcome, sir, on behalf of all the four institutions, BRC, St. Xavier's College, St. Paul's Cathedral Mission College, and Stockholm University. On behalf of all the four organizations, I would like to welcome you to deliver to present to make your presentation. Before that, I would like to give brief introduction of Professor Amit Dey. Dr. Amit Dey is a professor of history, Department of History, Center for Advanced Studies, University of Calcutta, India. He was the ex-head of Department of History and present MPhil coordinator, Calcutta University. He received PhD in History in September 1999 from University of London for his work on the image of the Prophet in Bengali Muslims, Paucity, 1850 to 1947, and completed his doctoral research as Commonwealth Scholar, being affiliated to the Department of History, Royal Holloway, University of London. His area of specialization is Islam and Islamic mysticism in medieval and modern South Asia. So he is very much, it needs no introduction that he is very much famous name in the field of Islamic Sufism, worked on Sufism in medieval and modern period. He published 4 books: Sufism in India, The Image of the Prophet in Bengali Muslim, 1850 to 1947, Islam in South Asia, and one co-edited book titled Between Tradition and Modernity, Aspects of Islam in South Asia. Dr. Dey is the coordinator of the Bengali academic journal Itihas, Iti Katha, and the resident editor of Indo-Iranica. The Comprehensive History of Indian Society has selected him as the joint editor for Volume 10. They has published over 50 articles on Islam and Islamic mysticism in the academic journals. He delivered lectures in famous institutions such as the University of Chicago, North Carolina State University, University of California, Santa Barbara, University of Heidelberg, University of Roma, University of Uppsala, Victoria University of Wellington, uh, Aligarh Muslim University, Jamia Millia University, University of London, the Asiatic Society Kolkata, Dhaka Asiatic Society, uh, Nalanda International University, Rajgir University of Kashmir, Srinagar, Central Guwahati University, Victoria Memorial Kolkata, ICCR, Kolkata Center for Studies in Social Science, Makais, Kolkata, Northeastern Hill University, Shillong, etc. Nearly 33 scholars have successfully completed their PhD and MPhil researches under his supervision. At present, 8 scholars are carrying on their PhD or MPhil research under his supervision. Apart from examining PhD thesis submitted in India and foreign universities, Professor De also acted as subject expert during selection of assistant professor, associate professor, and professor in India and foreign universities. Recently, he served as visiting professor in Northeastern Hill University, Nehu, and Vishwabharati, West Bengal. So this is a brief introduction about Professor De, and now I would like to request him, I would like to welcome him to deliver his presentation. Professor De.
Thank you, Professor, for a very generous introduction. I'm also grateful to the organizers, uh, Tinni and others, Narsimonti and all others who have invited me to share my views on research methodology, how certain aspects of cultural studies can be promoted. I'll be mainly concentrating on folk culture, folk songs today, uh, folk songs that engulfed the Bengal countryside, particularly during the colonial period. And I will try to share my experiences of handling such folk sources to carry out research. So I think it will be an useful exercise, and later on there will be a lively interaction. Now, as I handle the folk sources, at the same time, I will try to use this opportunity to challenge some of the stereotypes relating to culture, religion, to be more specific, Islam, etc. For example, there is a view that Islam is basically an urban religion. This is one point. I'm just demonstrating how you can carry out research on Islam, society, culture, with a focus on the countryside, with a focus on the sources that would be available in the countryside. Now, definitely in the countryside, you cannot expect archival sources. We massively have to rely on oral transmission of knowledge, oral sources. So let us focus today on folk sources, how we can handle folk songs to reconstruct the socio-cultural history of the past. And in our case, that past is the colonial past. Mainly, we should be focusing on the countryside because I believe that there had been many significant interventions so far as 19th century Bengal or colonial Bengal is concerned, but that discussion revolves around the urban pockets like Calcutta or Dhaka. So today, let us spill over to the countryside, the habitat of the majority of the population, Bengali speaking population. So, yes, there's a view that Islam is basically an urban religion which flourishes around the Kasbah, that is the small town, the bazaar, the market, uh, and the mosque. But let us challenge this stereotype. Our argument is that Islam can flourish with all its vitality, even in a rural environment. That we shall gradually unfold in course of our discussion, in course of our handling of the folk songs. Now, I am not going to claim that we are doing it as a pioneering effort because folk songs dedicated to or related to Islam, dedicated to the Prophet, dedicated to various Sufi saints. They are scattered all over the Islamic world. This is not unique so far as the Bengal countryside is concerned. What is pioneering in our effort is that a systematic
নিচে
study
যাব
carried out, a systematic study of such folk songs, a categorization or classification of such folk songs, a study of such folk songs in its proper historical, socio-economic, and political setting is necessary. So, from that angle, it can be a very pioneering effort. So, let us consult some folk songs. We shall not study the folk songs one after another. We shall rather offer a very thematic approach, and under certain themes, various types of folk songs can be clubbed together for to facilitate our discussion. Uh, these sort of songs, as I have mentioned, are scattered all over the Islamic world, but they so far had been the domain of the folklorists. I would suggest that social scientists from other branches, for example, anthropology, history, sociology, they should also utilize this gold mine of folk sources to reconstruct the past or to understand the present. And on the basis of this dialogue between the past and the present, we can also contemplate the future. That is crucial in the context of the constraints and challenges that is characterizing 21st century, not only in South Asia, but perhaps beyond. So, a systematic and conceptual study of these folk songs would be uh, our goal. That is very necessary. These are very rhythmic folk songs, as you can understand. In the urban pockets, literacy rate is quite high. There, people can access scriptures and other written forms of knowledge. But in the countryside, knowledge is primarily orally transmitted because literacy rate is relatively low in the countryside. So people rely on oral transmission of knowledge, and if this knowledge is provided in the form of poetry or songs, that aids the memorization process. In other words, that facilitates the transmission of knowledge, and that engulfs the countryside. So this is very much important for a proper understanding of society and culture, uh, societal or cultural studies. Now, I have to mention that you can there are two dimensions so far as the Bengal countryside in the colonial period is concerned. On the one hand, there was the spur of this religious revivalist movement, as you have noticed in Eastern Bengal in the form of Faraizi movement, and in parts of West Bengal as the part of Tariqa-i Muhammadiyya movement or Wahhabi movement. But actually, Wahhabi movement did not occur on the Indian soil. That occurred in the Middle East. But the British, for the sake of administrative convenience, just used this nomenclature of Wahhabi movement. Actually, it did not occur. Those who took part in this Titumir's movement, they called them Tariqa-i Muhammadiyya. That is the Tariqa means path of the Prophet. So this is a different challenge of religious revivalism. We will not concentrate on that today. We shall rather concentrate on another dimension of socio-cultural existence or experience in the Bengal countryside that was represented by the folk songs. So I would rather argue, I would rather advise you to understand the Bengal countryside or Bengal society and culture in the context of a subtle tension between Islamic revivalism on the one hand and folk syncretism, if you may use the term, folk syncretism on the other. And that folk syncretism was resonated in the exquisitely beautiful folk songs that created echoes in the Bengal countryside. So, this is very much crucial. Some of the songs, it goes without saying, were influenced by Sufism. Sufism inspired folk songs were these. So there had been appropriating nature, assimilative nature, so far as such folk songs are concerned. Now, our starting point could be 1850s. Why 1850s? Because in the 1850s, we notice that folk songs are easily traceable from that time. And also in the 1850s, steamers started to ply on the Ganges, and the folk singer, the folk poet, imagined this voyage by the steamer, voyage on the steamer. So they composed folk songs dedicated to this steam journey or steamer journey. So this is important. Where these sort of songs should be available from 1850s one onwards. Before that, it is very difficult to find, or at least to chronologically arrange the folk songs. So our starting point could be 1850s. We shall continue up to the first half of the 20th century. So steamers started plying on the Ganges on a regular basis from this 1850s, this decade. This is very much important. Now, this is interesting because in the Middle Eastern regions, in the desert prone regions, the Prophet Muhammad is compared with the caravan leader, Mir Karwa or Shatarban. Shatarban means camel driver, caravan leader. But in Bengal, you don't have desert. In undivided Bengal, in the colonial period, you don't have any desert. Even now, there is no desert. There is no sign of desertification. But Bengal is riverine. It's deltaic Bengal. It's riverine Bengal. So the caravan leader prophet Shatarban or that Mire Karwa prophet, caravan leader or camel driver prophet, is replaced by boatman prophet in Bengal, Sujon Kandari. So this is very much important. In the melodious folk songs of riverine Bengal, Muhammad, the mystical leader, appears as the boatman who carries the soul safely to the other shore of the river. So this is Bhavo Sindhu Toribare Horinam Bhela. So there are uh, commonalities which you can explore between two major religious practices, Hinduism and Islam. Bhavo Sindhu Toribare Horinam Bhela. Similarly, songs are dedicated to the boatman prophet who is supposed to take the soul peacefully from one shore to another. So this is the everyday imagination, everyday imagination of the everyday life of the common people, articulated through exquisitely beautiful folk songs, thanks to the intervention of folk philosophers or folk poets of Bengal. So this is very much important. Here the soul may be compared to the water hyacinths floating on the surface of the rivulets and canals, and the heart resembles the ripples on the surface of the water moved by changing winds. And again, these changing winds in this their turn can be compared with the changing socio-economic and political forces that led to the composition and molding of these folk songs. So there are various forms of folk songs. We do not have the time to elaborate on each category, but we can mention some of the major folk songs which might have representative value. Like the Baul songs, I need not elaborate on the Baul songs. These are mainly solo performances. Uh, there was economic distress in the 19th century, and many people in the countryside they became mendicant singers of the bowls. So the ranks of the bowls swelled because of the economic distress unleashed by the colonial rule. Then there was the Jari song. Unlike the bowls, it's not a solo performance; it's a group performance to add a sort of a dramatic impact in an otherwise monotonous rural life. These Jari songs are competitive. So these are group songs. And then also in Chittagong area, you will find Maij Bhandari songs, Sufism inspired Fokiri songs of Maij Bhandar, a place in Chittagong. So that's why they are known as Maij Bhandari singers or Maij Bhandari fakirs. And then there are feminine songs as well, Mehli Geet or feminine songs. My argument is that these are very rich sources so far as our challenge of reconstructing rural society is concerned. These sort of songs can be very helpful. And actually, our slogan can be you have to go beyond archives to reconstruct the socio-cultural history of the countryside in general and Bengal countryside in particular. So the Bauls belong to a community of mendicant singers known for their liberal attitude to all religions. Remember, they were not social reformers, but they reflected social discrimination, distress, oppression, displacement, etc. And they spoke for justice. So this is important, but they were not institutionalized social reformers, unlike Raja Ram Mohan Roy or Sir Syed Ahmed Khan and others. So this is important to remember. Now, apart from Sufism, they were Bauls were also influenced by Vaishnavism. So that is very much important. There were charismatic Baul singers, as you know. I need not elaborate the list of those charismatic Baul singers like Lalon Shah, Panju Shah, etc. The Bauls are mostly seen in the districts like Kushtia, Khulna, Pabna, Rajshahi, Faridpur, Dhaka, and Birbhum districts. They generally wear a kind of odd jubba, a long flowing gown, white in color, and play a single string musical instrument made of a hollowed and dried cavity of a gourd called ektara while singing. Now, I draw your attention to the fact that symbol is very important if you have to reconstruct the socio-cultural history of the Bengal countryside or any countryside. Symbols are very important. If you read this book by Claude Levi-Strauss, that book is on myths and meaning, a very important book. He also wrote in French. Most of his works were translated into English. So this is very much important. This you cannot leave any stone unturned as a social researcher, as a historical historian, or as a social scientist. You cannot leave any stone unturned. You have to see whether any message is being conveyed through a particular type of symbol. Definitively, this Ekstara is very symbolic. It is a single string instrument. This is a very simple instrument. It is a very cheap, cost effective. At least you do not pay any money to procure such a musical instrument. If you have the skill, you can just manufacture it on your own. And this single string resembles the Arabic letter alif, alif for Allah. That's the first letter in the Arabic alphabet. That is symbolic. So actually, the common people, sometimes the non-literate or semi-literate people, they identify Ektara with their identity formation process. And you will notice this identity formation process in terms of a subtle tension between the aristocrats, that's the Ashraf, who can trace their genealogy in West Asia or Central Asia, and the indigenous Muslims or Ajlaf. Ajlafs are converted Muslims, common Muslims, who cannot trace their genealogy in the uh, Arab world or in the Middle East. So they cannot claim extraterritoriality. They're indigenous people, but they're very proud. They're very dignified. They launch their identity formation process by legitimizing the resources they have ready in their hand, like Ektara. So Ektara is a sort of a musical instrument for which you need not pay much. You can learn this sort of folk songs in a very spontaneous manner. It's not like classical music. That is the reserve. That is the reserve of the Ashraf. Because to learn classical music, you have to pay a huge sum of money to the master, to the ustad, and you have to procure an expensive musical instrument. So that is the privilege of the aristocrats of the Ashraf. But there is de-Ashrafization in the Bengal countryside. You have to understand this identity formation process in terms of this de-Ashrafization process. Common people try to redefine their identity, contrasting their position with the position of the, or with the pride of the Ashraf community, mainly from Upper India. So this tension is very interesting. That is manifested in various folk songs. We may have the opportunity to come back to one of such folk songs where there you will notice a tension going on between the Ashraf and the Ajlaf population. Actually, that is the narrative of the identity formation process in the Bengal countryside. So these sort of sources are very important, either to ignored by historians, but historians cannot afford, social scientists cannot afford to ignore such folk songs which are replete with examples of such tension, subtle tension between the Ashraf and the Ajlaf, which actually reflect the story of identity formation so far as the countrymen or country people or rural folks are concerned. That is very much important. So uh, British land policy, it was hostile, and that increased the ranks of mendicant singers, as I have indicated earlier. And Jari is a type of folk song that is, I have already mentioned. It's a group song. Uh, Jari song is mainly a religious song that is sung during the Muharram to commemorate the uh, martyrdom of Hussein. That is the grandson of the Prophet. But you have to understand that these folk songs are uh, folk songs are just can be sung even beyond that festivity. That is, this can be seasonal songs as well. You cannot exclusively call it a religious song. So these are important dimensions, because why this symbolism? I have mentioned that symbols are very important. Common people try to identify their plight with the tragic battle of Karbala, where Hussein attained martyrdom. Now Hussein is venerated uh, by the Sufis, because he is known as the martyr of love. So by identifying their plight with Hussein, they try to just narrate their displacement in the countryside, maybe due to various reasons, due to the British land policy, other natural calamities, and so on. So these are very important. So this sort of imagination is very important. In northern India, these are known as Marsia in Urdu, and in Bengal, these are known as Jari. Actually, it is Zaridan. That's a Persian term, means lamentation. Z is replaced by jaw or j in Bengali, because in Bengali you do not have any letter, just which can substitute z. In Urdu you can. So it is Jari song, that is lamentation for Hussein. So common people they reflect their everyday sorrows and suffering by taking part in Jari songs. It is very important. So when you reconstruct the socio-cultural history, you have to take into consideration the significance of such Jari and Baul songs. This is very much important. And interestingly, Robert Clive was imagined as Yazid, and Sirajuddaulah is imagined as Hussein. So this is very much important, martyr Hussein. So in this way, common people try to locate them in historical changes, in historical events, in their identity formation process. They seek peace and solace from such folk songs. So these sort of songs are very important if you have to chronicle the everyday life of the common people. Uh, Jari has still maintained popularity among the Hindus. So these are important dimensions. You have to understand that the Lalon Shah used to sing "Shab loke koi Lalon ki jaat sangsare." So they do not believe in this sort of a discrimination between Hindus or Muslims and such. So this Hindu participation in Jari song is very important um, in the Bengal or Bangladeshi countryside. Josor and Khulna, the Jari is not treated as a religious song, but as a seasonal song, and it is not necessarily performed in the month of Muharram. So throughout the year you will find some sort of performances going on in Josor and Khulna. This is very much important. You cannot reconstruct socio-cultural history by excluding such sources replete with examples of everyday life, sorrows and sufferings, passions, and also the pathos of the common people. So this is Battle of Plassey, as you can imagine. They are imagined by people as the Battle of Karbala. So the Battle of Karbala of the people of Bengal is a Battle of Plassey. So these sort of comparisons are very important. Uh, in Jari songs are sung to the accompaniment of dancing and music, musical instruments such as dhol, cylindrical drum beaten at each hand, shanai, as you know what is shanai, cymbal, and then harmonium and tabla. They are used, very rudimentary type of musical instruments. These are not expensive things. Common people can access them. Now, there's another dimension. When you reconstruct socio-cultural history, or anthropologically or sociologically, you approach society. So you try to understand social events, then you have to, or culture, then you have to understand that this music and song, even if you do not use the terms or the content of the songs, even if you do not study the content of the song, music and song or poems, they themselves pose a serious challenge, symbolic challenge to hegemonic orthodoxy. Rabindranath Tagore, Nazrul Islam, Lalon Shah, various others, Bulle Shah of Punjab, they understood the potentiality of music, and even Gandhi. I do not have the time to delve deep into that, but even these great personalities in Indian history, they could understand the potentiality of music, poetry, and dance to challenge symbolically hegemonic orthodoxy. That is very much important. During the interactive session, I may be delighted to respond to your queries relating to this tension between hegemonic orthodoxy and composite culture. So, and then there are the Maij Bhandari songs, as I have already indicated, that is in Chittagong. Maij Bhandar was a famous center of Marifati, that is esoteric songs in Chittagong. According to the name of the place, the Marifati songs of this area were known as Maij Bhandari songs, and their singers were called Maij Bhandari singers or simply Maij Bhandaris. However, it should be mentioned that the Maij Bhandari singers were not merely confined to Chittagong. They became popular throughout Bangladesh. The Maij Bhandari singers used to have a murshid. Murshid means spiritual guide, and to a large extent they function like a Sufi sect. This is very much important. Now you know that Sufis pose a serious challenge to hegemonic orthodoxy often. So these are very important. Now let us highlight certain themes that can be useful. Uh, so there are some themes that these themes are reflected in folk songs. We have a time constraint, so we can highlight only one or two aspects. One is cosmogony, or the light of uh, Muhammad. That is very much important. Nur Muhammad, or the cosmogonical concepts, are very important. Socio-economic and political issues are there in the songs. So it is easier to reconstruct societal history if you focus on that. So I will just highlight that the Bauls of the Majbandaris were singing songs on the concept of Nuri Muhammadi, presenting the Prophet Muhammad and his mediatorship of creation as a source of authority. In doing so, the Bauls of the Majbandaris were probably responding in a subconscious way to the missionary enterprise, aiming at enhancing the status of Jesus Christ and Christianity as compared to Islam and its prophet. I'm just quoting one Lalon Shah song. The sky, the earth, and the wind, together with water, all are born of his luminous spirit, that is Nur Muhammad. In a Jari song, you will find that Gabriel was annoyed to find that the daughter of the Prophet, Fatima, is addressing Gabriel as Choto Chacha. Gabriel expected that he would be addressed as Boro Chacha. Then they appeared before the Prophet. Then Prophet asked, yes, Fatima was right when she addressed you as the Choto Chacha, because I am senior, the Prophet said. How is that possible? Then the Prophet asked Gabriel whether he saw anything at the time of his birth. Then the Gabriel said that at the time of my birth, I saw near the horizon a sort of a starry light. So a sort of a starry light. So that is Nur Muhammad. So the Prophet said, so when you were born, you already saw me. So I am, in terms of antiquity, I preceded you. So that is why in this way the superiority of the Prophet as compared to angels had been established in this sort of imagination by this sort of cosmogonical concepts were brought into play. These were used as source of authority. So it confirms that some sort of competition was going on in 19th century Bengal, and also in the Bengal countryside, because of these various religions were trying to just uh, carry out their preaching in the countryside. So this is manifested in the folk songs, that is manifested in the Baul and Jari songs. This is very much important to understand. Uh, so you cannot always say that there was syncretism, unalloyed syncretism in the folk songs, or there is also flashes of there are also flashes of competitive spirituality that is resonated in the folk songs. So these sort of dimensions, competitive dimensions, are also manifested in the folk songs. You have to understand that society was not something which was very stable, which was very facile. It was very complex, and there was tension going on in society, competitive spirituality, and so on. So this sort of information will be very important for us. Uh, for example, the Maijbandari said buffaloes, they resemble cowherd Krishna or shepherd prophets. Moses and Jesus Christ, they were shepherds. So I cannot recognize the light which was responsible for the creation of this universe. When the Arabic letter meme is put in the middle of the word Ahad, Ahad becomes Ahmad. I'm not elaborating, there's a time constraint, but this sort of symbolic representation of cosmogonical ideas, or the relationship between the prophet and God, relationship between man and God, these are very important in the everyday existence of the common people and everyday struggle for to forge an identity for themselves in the countryside in spite of being marginalized. They were deriving peace, solace, and self-confidence from such songs, from such newly defined cosmogonical theories, and this sort of interplay of letters, Arabic letters, in the Bengal context as well. So I will just wind up by just highlighting two aspects. My argument is that when you study the folk songs, you will find that though there was the decline or degeneration of the empire, that is the Mughal Empire. So Mughal Empire used to patronize certain things like Sufism, like music, like painting, like language, like the Persian language, which was Indo-Persian cosmopolitan culture. My argument is that with the decline of the Mughals, Persian culture, Persianate culture, Persianate heterogeneity or cosmopolitanism, that did not disappear suddenly, abruptly. That continued for some time. So with the decline of the empire, other institutions came forward, like the folk singers, folk poets. They thought it their responsibility to sustain this cosmopolitan, humane, or humanitarian folk tradition, syncretistic, composite folk tradition, or to some extent quasi-secular folk tradition, by just borrowing certain aspects of the greater Perso-Islamic tradition. So I will not contrast this high Perso-Islamic tradition with the folk tradition. Sometimes they emulated each other. This sort of overlapping makes it so interesting, that has to be understood. For example, I'm giving you one example. One Maijbandari song runs like that. Jalali Jamali Khela Khelche Boshe Malik Maula Lukaiya Roi. So you carefully follow the selection of Persian words in this song. It's a Bengali song, but it is deliberately selecting some Persian words. So when there is no longer the empire which can sustain or patronize the language, this charge was taken up on the shoulder by the folk singers to sustain the heterogeneity, cosmopolitanism, secular, humane dimension of the Persianate culture, Indo-Persian culture. So this is very much important. The folk songs played a very significant role in just sustaining such humane, composite, quasi-secular dimension. That is very much important. That is very much important in the 21st century context, when we are facing certain constraints, certain tension between liberalism and conservatism and so on. I don't want to elaborate, but you all understand that we are facing some crisis that can be ideologically addressed if you look back, or if you go back beyond, or if you go beyond archives to consult such sources replete with such examples. So I will wind up by highlighting one story. There is another Jari song that is saying that Bibi Kulsum, the daughter of the Prophet, invited everyone. Bibi Kulsum is the representative of the Ashraf, that is the high-born aristocratic Muslim in the countryside, in the popular imagination of the folk poet. She invited everyone but did not invite Fatima. Fatima is another beloved daughter of the Prophet. Fatima is the symbol of mystical Islam. Fatima is the wife of Ali. Damaddam Mast Kalandar Ali da Pahla Number. That is the Qawwali song, as you know. So Fatima is the symbol, Ali is the symbol of mystical Islam. Hussein is the symbol of mystical Islam. But Kulsum is the symbol of opulence. Kulsum is the symbol of affluence. Kulsum is the symbol of aristocratic existence, like the Ashraf existence. So de-Ashrafization was represented by Fatima. I will not elaborate this story, but ultimately all the foodstuff stored in the godown of Kulsum disappeared. But Fatima ultimately forgave her sister Kulsum. Ultimately, everyone was happy in that feast, in that village feast, and Fatima was being accompanied by Ali, Prophet Muhammad, Hassan, and Hussein. They are together known as Pak Panjatan, that is the five holy persons. This is very interesting in Sufi philosophy. Appropriation of the holy number five. Five is very holy. So five is holy in almost all major religions in the world. Five is holy in Hinduism. Five is holy in Sikhism. I'm not elaborating because I don't have the time. But if you just carry out your investigation, you will find that five is a holy number in many religions, including Christianity. You will have five disciples of Jesus Christ, and so on. So these are very important. Appropriation of the holy number. In this way, these folk songs enabled certain folk elements to legitimize themselves on the soil of Bengal. That is very much important. There was an interfaith dialogue with different communities that was facilitated by this sort of borrowing, creative borrowing. And not only that, Fatima was being accompanied by Ganga. There is no mention of Ganga in the Quran or Hadith. Ganga is the holy for the Hindus, but Ganga is accompanying Fatima. Ganga was in charge of distributing drinking water to the guests. So in the earlier biye bari or wedding ceremonies, you know that this sort of some people were in charge of distributing water. So this was a traditional practice. So Ganga was in charge of distributing water to the guests, and Pir Mother also was portrayed as the son of Fatima. This is not historically true, but so what? In the popular imagination of the folk poet, the folk poet is observing some sort of reconciliatory compromise, some sort of compromising reconciliatory approach, some sort of syncretizing approach, appropriating nature of the folk songs made Islam very popular. So our argument is that Islam can flourish with all its vitality, with such flexibility, even in the countryside. Islam is not exclusively an urban religion. It can flourish with all its vitality, even in the countryside. And in the popular imagination, in this struggle between the Ashraf of the aristocratic Muslims and the have-nots, have-nots were represented by Fatima, as I've mentioned. She appeared in public in a shabby wrapper as a mystical leader. So she is the repository of mystical knowledge, hidden knowledge. That is very much important. I will not elaborate now, but during the interactions, I would be delighted to respond to your queries. So in this way, you understand many such things. Economic situation, that is exploitation, just unleashed by the Mahajans and the Zamindars in the countryside, just tension between the Ashraf and the Ajlaf, tension between the universal symbols of religion and the local symbols of religion, local symbols being represented by the likes of Peer Mother or the local Peer and something like that. So you understand in a very comprehensive and holistic manner the identity formation of the rural folk if you consult such folk songs. So this is a gold mine of sources. Both the anthropologists, social scientists of other branches like sociologists, political scientists, historians, and even those who are engulfed in folklore, those folklorists, philosophers, they can utilize this sort of folk songs to reconstruct or to understand the everyday existence of the common people in a more comprehensive and meaningful way. And also the literary personalities are invited, they are most welcome to consult such sources. So if you have such a multidisciplinary approach, such exchanges of experiences between across the disciplines, I think it will be more comprehensive. Our approach will be more comprehensive, and we shall have a more relatively comprehensive picture of the countryside, of the common people, of the marginalized elements. That will add a new dimension to our understanding of society, our understanding of mankind. So thank you for your patience. You had been listening to me for quite some time. Now I'll be delighted to respond to your queries, if any. Thank you so much once again.
So we would like to extend our thankfulness to Professor Amit Dey for his beautiful presentation. If we take some of the key words from his presentation, one is reconstruction of history. So this is very important part, and the reconstruction on the basis of folk song, particularly folk song. Once Rabindranath Tagore told in one of his songs, গানের ভিতর দিয়ে যখন দেখি ভুবনখানি আমি তখন তাকে চিনি তখন তাকে জানি. I am able to recognize and appreciate my society when I see it through song. So actually what Professor Amit Dey wanted to present today, the spirit of his presentation is to reconstruction, to know the society through the folk song, and particularly the dialectics of Islamic society, particularly the issue of Ashraf and de-Ashrafization, the dialectics that is there within the Islam of Bengal, particularly in Bengal. That is one very, very important aspect. And he also mentioned one very core philosophical note on Islam, on Islamic theology perhaps, that is the meme. I can remember just now one line from Qazi Nazrul Islam, ইসলামের ওই মিমের পর্দা সরিয়ে দেখরে মন আহাদ সেথায় বিরাজ করে হ্যারে গুণীজন. So the meme, he was telling about symbol. So meme has become a very significant symbol which makes difference between prophet and the Almighty. However, I would like to invite if there is any question, but I would like to request the team to read the question on behalf of me, because where I am staying now, there is no electricity. I am in Sundarban now. So please, I request the team to help me if there is any question, to read out the question for Professor Dey.
Sure, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Amit sir. Thank you, Makbul sir. So the first question is from Dr. Shantanu Dey. He asks that to what extent is syncretism a valid or useful analytical category for studying folk culture? How can one be more specific about cultural grafting techniques?
Yeah, Dr. Shantanu, very relevant question. Very relevant question. Actually, I didn't get the time, but I would suggest that there is nothing like unalloyed syncretism. So this concept of this notion of syncretism actually emerged because of a historical necessity. For example, during the anti-colonial struggle, there was the divide and rule policy of the British, and then there was the two nation theory. The nationalists and later on also the Marxists and other progressive people, they wanted to encounter such divisive elements in Indian society to unite the people of India, to maintain the integrity of India, harmony among different communities. So they actually popularized the term, rather mythologized the term syncretism. But there is nothing like unalloyed syncretism. I'm very much aware of that. I didn't get the time to delve deep into that. But that syncretism, that aspect coincided with another term that I probably had mentioned, competitive spirituality. Competitive spirituality. I will give you one example, because I've already mentioned that 19th century is the century of religious competition. So any good literature is a reflection of contemporary society, contemporary challenges. Folk songs could not ignore that competitiveness prevalent in society. So competitive spirituality was there. I just recite one Baul song. These sort of Bauls were not properly studied. They were rather ignored, because the nationalist historians, the Marxist historians, their own agenda to promote communal harmony. So they put overemphasis, or rather exaggerated the term syncretism. I agree with that. But that was a historical necessity. Nowadays, after so many decades of independence, we can afford to be a little bit critical to towards our past. We can explore the complexities of our society, and I fully agree with you. There was competitive spirituality. For example, in Nasiruddin and Fulbasuddin's Padavali, that's edited by the famous scholar Ahmad Sharif of Bangladesh, who died a few years back. Uh, that uh, I just remember this sort of lines. Uh, what is the line? বাংলাদেশের জংলা মুসলমান কই মানে হাদিস কোরআন শার্ট কোট ঘড়ি পকেটে দাড়ি রাখেন অ্যালবার্ট ছাটে সাহবন টুপির নাইকো মান, something like that. So these sort of folk songs are actually reflecting the agenda of the religious revivalists, not necessarily the agenda of Lalon Shah or other syncretizing elements in society. So you have to take into consideration, when you have to portray a very comprehensive picture of contemporary society within a span of 100 years, you have to take into consideration that which were the challenges to syncretism. Definitely there have been challenges to syncretism, competitive spirituality, or rather propagation on behalf of the religious revivalists, or rather hegemonic orthodoxy. I have mentioned the term hegemonic orthodoxy. That was also an agenda that was also resonated in some of the folk songs. But I can say that if you just compare the folk songs which reflected the humanity aspect of Lalon Shah, or the syncretizing aspect of Lalon Shah, this syncretizing folk songs reflecting the composite nature of our culture, that will just far outweigh the folk songs that reflected the exclusivism of prevalent in society. Thank you, Shantanu. We have to be careful. We have to be alert. But these sort of things are there. We have to understand society in terms of its complexity, in terms of challenges, not as a facile continuation. Thank you for highlighting this very important aspect. If there is any other question.
Are there any question, madam?
Yes, sir. There is two more questions.
Okay. Let us. Okay, we can take one question.
Yes.
Because we have to proceed to the next speaker.
Okay. Sure, sir. So another question is from Momita Haldar. She asks that you have mentioned that it is difficult to trace the history of folk songs of Bengal before 1850s. Does it apply for Bhatiali and Sharigan as well? If so, then why? And if you can throw some light on the both songs of Bengal.
Yeah. Thank you, Momita, for a very important question that you have raised. Actually, the point is that, as I have already indicated, that these sort of songs were orally transmitted. You know what happens under such circumstances. For example, I will give you the example of the case of Kabir, or the case of Bulle Shah of Punjab and Kabir of northern India. So these sort of songs are orally transmitted. So under such circumstances, what happens, the next generation often adds some new points, some new lines into those songs. So unless you get them printed or written down, it becomes very difficult to trace the authenticity of such songs. So that is the major challenge. And this is very interesting question that you have raised. There was a rather reluctance in Bengali Muslim society to accept printing technology. In the 1870s, I do not have the time to delve deep into that. I could have delivered another lecture on this printing technology. In the 1870s, Bengal Muslims rather reluctantly accepted printing technology, not before that. So After that, you will find that some great poets, some great collector of folk songs came forward, not only Rabindranath Tagore, but Mansuruddin, Jasimuddin. They collected folk songs and they were preserved in written form, in printed form. But before that, folk songs could not be chronologically organized, because the sense of history, the sense of time, it emerged much later. History writing, professional historians emerged much later in our history. So for various reasons, I'm not going into that. So it is very difficult to use the folk songs prior to 1850, because they cannot be chronologically arranged, and sometimes there can be certain additions, and some are just rejections also. So that's why the authenticity of those songs can also be challenged. So if you read books like Lutfur Rahman, compiled by Abu Talib and compiled by Jasimuddin himself and by Mansuruddin, you will find this sort of songs, and that you are looking for. And then in Western Bengal, this sort of collection had been carried out by Sudhir Kumar Chakraborty, by Shaktinath Jha, and various others. So you can consult those things to elaborate on your experience of this preservation of folk songs. Thank you for a very
Thank you, thank
relevant.
you, thank you, Professor Amit De. Just I would like to add one or two lines in response to the question raised by Madam Moumita. Amit De has mentioned about one song, Ei Parete Daro Dinai. So this line, actually the song is this is Bhatiali song. এই পারেতে দরদি নাই ওই পারেতে যাইবারে চাই. This is actually Bhatiali song. So since I am in the Bhatiali song area, let me sing two line of this song. এই পারেতে দরদি নাই ওই পারেতে যাইবারে চাই. হয় না আমার পারে যাওয়া, হয় না আমার পারে যাওয়া, চঞ্চলিয়া চলিয়া যায়. সুজন মাঝি রে কোন ঘাটে লাগাইবা তোমার নাম. So this is the song what he was telling about Sujan Mazi. So it relates to the theory of prophet, however he has mentioned. And another is work song. Shari is basically work song. রূপসী নদীর নাও সুজন মাঝির নাও তরতরায়া যায় হায় রে কোন বাদাসে উজান বায়া যায় রে. So this is how Sari song goes. So but the Bhatiali song is more close to the theoretical or the theological aspect which Professor De has pointed out. So our next speaker is there, and I hand over this microphone. I again would like to extend my thanks to Professor Amit De for his illuminating presentation, and I hand over this microphone to Tinni Madam.
Thank you, Professor Makbul. Excellent.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you to Dr. Amit De for this extraordinary presentation on the cultural pluralism and the confluences of the cultures of Islam and Hinduism, and we can also get a subaltern flavor, like how the mass or the ordinary people can be related to this entire discourse, not only based on religion, based on culture, based on ethnology, and also based on behavioral anthropology. So thank you, sir. Thank you so much. So thank you, Dr. Sheikh Makbul Islam, sir. And also thank you to our research fellow of Bhaktivedanta Research Center, Ashrimunti. And now I would like to go for the next session, and we have Dr. Urika Matrinson as our respected speaker. So, welcome, ma'am, and please accept my greetings from India. So, it's my privilege to introduce Dr. Urika. Urika Matrinson did her PhD in 2001 in History of Religions from the Faculty of Theology from Uppsala University, Sweden. Her thesis treats al-Tabari's history of the messengers and the kings. Since 2004, she is based at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Trondheim, Al-Tabari's works remain the main focus of her research, though she has branched out also to Quranic studies and aspects of Islamic law, as well as modern forms of Islam, including the context of the Nordic countries. She teaches introductions to Middle East religions and Islam in Norway. Of particular interest to her is the roles that science plays in disciplines and in religion generally, and what that implies for concepts and study of religion. So, ma'am, I'm feeling delighted and I'm meeting you after 8 long years. So it's something like I'm feeling nostalgic and emotional. So I'm I don't know how to express my gratitude, and maybe I am becoming a bit emotional in this regard. But kindly take over the session and enlighten our participants. Thank you, Dr. Urika Matrinson.
Thank you so much, Tini, for your warm introduction and for your personal note also. Tini and I know each other since a conference I organized here in Trondheim in 2012, in fact, where Tini contributed with a fantastic paper on her subject of Indic medicine. So I'm so honored to be part of this program. And as you will see from my talk, I am a student still in a learning process, learning about Islamic religion and civilization indeed, and now also taking a first step to compare to some extent with Indian literature as well. So I will try to start by screen sharing, hoping that this will work. So share screen here. Yes. And
Ma'am, we can see your screen. It's perfectly all right. We can see the first slide.
yes, thank you so much. So the topic for my talk is Significances of India, Interpreting Islamic Literary Genres as Forms of Ontology, Epistemology, and Natural Law Theory. We see on this first slide a peacock, the Indian national bird, I have understood, which is also has symbolic references to kingship. And in the picture below, we see the Mughal Shah Jahan, if I am to trust the internet's attribution of this picture, on what would be then the peacock throne. Now, first of all, I would like to start with some brief self-reflection. Why have I chosen this topic? Well, it has to do with the structured observations that I've been making of Tabari's political history since my PhD thesis in 2001. We will hear more about the Tabari. He was a great Muslim scholar who died in the year 310 Hijra or 923 Common Era. I have also made less structured observations since around 2000 or so of Nordic political and public discourse on the topics of integration of immigrants and about Islam. And mostly immigrants, immigration and Islam are perceived as problematic in various ways. These are people who represent different cultures than the Nordic ones, and that is problematic according to these discourses. And especially problematic is the Islamic legacy of law, Sharia, and its political history related to the caliphates and the imperial institutions. So my general questions that inform most of my thinking about Islam concern what we can learn from Islamic theory, which is related to the administration of diverse groups and religions. Because I am concluding actually that the Islamic theory took another approach to the problem, or rather the fact of difference, different religions, different ethnic groups, different languages, etc., and didn't problematize it at all in the same way as we do in the Nordic context. But one also has to ask to what extent theory can be detached from imperial pursuit. And I include here the aspect that Western research, including my own on Islam, can very well be perceived as that part of an imperial pursuit in several ways concerning the power relationships in especially the Nordic countries. So I will give you a brief overview of the development of my ideas that I'm presenting here. You see in the photograph at the right-hand top corner of the slide, the scholar at-Tabari, who I've been studying for quite some time now. And I have been recently developing the approach of natural law theory, which I will explain in a moment what that means, in a number of publications. One which is coming out just now, an article entitled Through the Lens of the Quranic Covenant, Theories of Natural Law and Social Contract in al-Tabari's Exegesis and History, which is coming out in a collected volume on reason, revelation, and law in Islamic and Western theory and history, edited by Charles Weller and Anver Emon. But I have also written 2 books, which, well, I say here they should come out in 2020, but probably more likely 2021. They concern, one is focused on Tabari and his law school, Tabari and the Jariri methodology, a paradigm of natural law and natural rights for the Abbasid Caliphate. The second one focuses on the Quran. It is entitled Divine Covenant, Science and Concepts of Natural Law in the Quran and Islamic Disciplines. So this is the background to much of what I'm presenting today. The outline then is that I will first briefly go through the discourse analysis that I'm using here and what theory means in that context. I will then look specifically at some theories, natural law theory, epistemology, and ontology. Then move on to look at the Quran, the Islamic sacred scripture, and its concept of ilm, knowledge, and compare that tentatively with the Indic Veda concept, which also means knowledge, as we have learned, or I have learned rather. Then I will look at 2 Islamic scholars, Ibn al-Muqaffa and at-Tabari, and the ways in which they refer to India for knowledge. And finally, I will conclude with a brief reflection on the relationship between theory and literary genre. So we start with a concept of discourse. And here, as always, almost, I'm relying on a French historian of religions, Michel de Certeau, who you see on the picture to the right, and especially a book of his entitled The Writing of History. So, according to de Certeau's approach then, discourse means trying to analyze the importance of institutional practices for knowledge production. So if we imagine a body of knowledge in the form of this blue triangle that we see here in the slide, The Certeau's approach means that this body of knowledge is produced as a kind of interplay between three factors. An institution in society, so academia is an institution which functions and produces knowledge within a particular societal and political order. Within academia, we then have various disciplines, as we know. And each discipline has a field of inquiry, theoretical paradigms and concepts, sources, methods, and problem areas, etc. The point of the Certeau is that these are always referring somehow to the societal and political order. Then the third level is the subject matter of a particular study. And here, the individual scholar's preferences, concerns, and choices of problem definition interact with discipline and institution. So all three together converge in the production of academic knowledge. As for de Certeau himself, his personal background is that he was a Jesuit scholar and a modern historian of religion in France, particularly in the early modern time. And he was dealing with a, in his view, prominent discourse that religion is not science, which he challenges. And he explains this discourse in terms of the role that modern academia plays in the secular nation-state order. So in the European context and France after the Enlightenment, where religion is separated from government, from national law, and also from science. So religion becomes a matter for church. It has to do with faith, spirituality, ethics, and ritual, whereas science is the domain of the university. And this has consequences, he argues, for the modern discipline of religious studies, where religion is an object of scientific analysis, and it is theorized as a sociological or a social phenomenon analyzed very predominantly in sociological terms. That means that religion can't study itself, or religious people can't provide scientifically valid ways of defining themselves or even religion. So de Certeau then, his problem definition is firstly to distinguish between ideology and theory. So he's arguing that ideology means to reduce reality to conform to one or other theoretical paradigm, which is often implicit, i.e. it's not stated in a transparent way what paradigm one is actually operating with. And this is also the level of politics. Theory of social sciences is instead the application of one of several possible paradigms for analyzing data, which is explicitly stated. And in that way, one establishes causality within the framework of a particular study. And that, he argues, is the scientific approach as opposed to the politics of ideology. And when it comes to religion, then he's arguing that religion can be studied in terms of its theoretical and practical continuities with science, which is his main interest area and also my own. So I now move on to define for you briefly the three sets of theories I'm working with in this paper. First of all, natural law theory. And here I've picked three definitions. If you look in the column to the left, one from Kenneth Einar Himma, to be found on the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. He says, natural law theory means that laws depend for their authority on the logical relationship in which they stand to moral standards. So the law gains authority by reference to a moral standard. John Finnis, who is also a scholar of natural law theory, he says that this theory also requires an epistemic claim to absolute truth for the law's moral standard. So the moral standard is not relative, but it is absolutely true. He also says that natural law theory is related to the rule of law in the political sphere. So rulers, according to rule of law, they derive their authority by respecting the claims of the common good and by entering a reciprocal relationship with the ruled. Third definition of natural law theory is from Anver Emon, who is a scholar working on Islamic concepts of natural law. And he has found that the Muslim jurists that he analyzes in terms of natural law theory, what they do is they construct divine creation as a reference point, which is also the kind of factual reality that they refer to when they define the law's moral standard. And I will illustrate this in due course here, what this means. Next theory is ontology, which, as we have heard from Ferdinando Sardella, ontology is a theory of being and to some extent of concepts. But so it asks, what does to be mean? What things exist? Is there an objective reality and is there a God? And if we refer ontology to, for example, Finnis's definitions of natural law theory, we could ask, what is truth? What is the law? What is a moral standard? And with reference to Anver Emon's point, what is divine creation? And third set of theories, epistemology, which, as Ferdinando said, is a theory of knowledge. So we ask, how do we know? How can we know things and reality? How can we know God? And with respect to natural law theory, how do we know the truth? How do we know the law and the law's moral standard? And with reference to Amon's point, how can we know divine creation? How can we know what divine creation means for the law's moral standard? So these are the theoretical sets that I will be dealing with. Now, I said I will be looking at the Quran and its concept of ilm, or divine knowledge, in order to also then look at the Veda. So in the Quran, several instances of creation are described, because the Quran is not a chronological narrative. It is composed of 114 topical chapters or surahs. And creation is mentioned in several of these chapters in different contexts. I will be focusing on the relationship between creation and covenant, the contract between God and man in the Quran. So I would argue that the Quran expresses an ontology in this particular example, where the human being is God's covenant, which was established at creation. The corresponding epistemology is that God makes covenant known in the written Quran, And there is, I would argue, a natural law aspect to this as well, because covenant is the absolutely true moral standard for the law that is derived from the Quran. And this covenant also takes the form of a reciprocal agreement. So in Surah 7, Al-A'raf, verse 172, the covenant of creation is described. It says, "When your Lord took from the backs of Adam's children their offspring and made them witness against themselves, 'Am I not your Lord?' They said, 'So you are, we witness,' so that you cannot say on the day of standing to trial, 'But we were unaware of this.'" So this is a contract that's entered where both parties, God and Adam's children, that is mankind, have entered this kind of covenantal contract between them. And this is also significant in Islamic law and in the Quran for the further obligations and rights that are specified in the scripture. So if we look at Surah number 4, An-Nisa, women, this surah treats rights and obligations of weak groups. And here we see another reference to divine creation in the first opening verse of this surah. Divine creation is here described as a fact again and a moral standard. O people, the verse says, fulfill your obligations towards your Lord who created you by dividing one person and thereby distinguishing from it its other half, and spread from the two of them numerous men and women. Fulfill your obligations towards God, by whom you appeal to one another, and towards kinship. Indeed, God is a constant surveyor over you. So here it is said, the fact of divine creation is that God has created all human beings from one person who he divided up into a man and a woman, and then the rest of mankind follow from them. And therefore, because of this, you should fulfill your obligations towards God when you appeal to each other, to one another, i.e. in the legal context. So in this surah, some of the laws concern inheritance, for example, and I'm not here presenting whole verses, but I'm showing to you in the next column the concluding statements which illustrate God as in his epistemological function. So verses 11 and 12, they are about inheritance law, and they conclude by saying, verse 11, this is an obligation from God. Indeed, God is a possessor of full knowledge who gives rulings. Alim Hakim. And Alim comes from the same consonant root as the word ilm, knowledge. God has the full knowledge and constantly knows everything. Verse 12, this is an obligation from God, and God is a possessor of full knowledge who is discerning. Alim Halim. And then the last verse of the whole surah repeats the same statement. God is a possessor of full knowledge about each thing, i.e. here each legal issue. Wallahu bikulli shay'in alim. So God has a clear epistemic function in this setting. He knows, and therefore he gives the rulings that men should follow as part of their obligations in the covenant. In verse 26 of this surah, it is also stressed that the divine knowledge that's conveyed here is shared by preceding peoples. So it's not unique to the prophet and his community, his people, which are addressed here. So, for example, if verse 425 contains marriage laws, Verse 426 then stresses, I quote, God wants to convey clear distinctions to you and guide you along the paths of those who went before you and turn towards you in forgiveness, for God is a possessor of full knowledge who gives rulings. And then in the verse 435, we also find the definition of justice in this particular surah. O you who faithfully enact security, be upholders of equity, witnesses for God, even if it is against yourselves, the parents or the kinsmen. Be it a rich person or a poor, God is a better governor for them. So do not follow your urges away from doing justice, and whether you govern or desist, indeed God is fully informed of what you do. So again, one could say that these are examples that I interpret as in line with this idea from Finis that the moral standard of the law involves a claim to absolute truth, and here God is the sort of representative and conveyor of this absolute truth, and he has full knowledge of it. And now we come to the comparative aspect, or exercise here rather, where I will compare the Quranic ilm, knowledge, with the Vedic. So starting with the Quran, the whole idea behind it is that the divine knowledge is conveyed through prophets and then to men and women for that matter, so mankind. It is known in the form of a written scripture, so it is an empirical epistemology here, or theory of knowledge. How do we know the divine knowledge? Well, through the written scripture, by reading it and understanding it. And the sum total of this divine knowledge amounts to deen, a kind of social order which has a divine origin. It includes law, covering family law, trade law, laws for crimes, war, treaties, and relations with others. It also encompasses ethics and moral legal categories, purity rules, and rules for ritual. And in this way, the Quran serves as both the moral standard for the Islamic law, the Sharia, and as its first source. So from it, we get commentaries, tafsir, legal treatises, and derived law. And as for the Veda, parallel here, I am relying exclusively on one article, Roshen, from 1978, because I am totally ignorant in the field of Indic studies, and I must apologize if what I say sounds very basic and crude and possibly even wrong to you, and I look forward to your further comments. But relying here on Roshen's study then, Veda's knowledge is revealed to sages and then to men. It is known as heard, but then takes the form of written scripture. So it becomes available empirically through that source. It takes the form of dharma, a social and cosmic order, which encompasses law, and within law, similar issues to the Quranic counterpart, ethics and morals, purity rules and ritual. And parts of the Veda scriptures serve also as sources for the law. Commentaries, legal treatises, and derived law follow from that. I have deduced from this particular article then. One of the so-called law texts that derive from the Vedas then would be the Manus Dharma Shastra, which my source dates to around 100 Common Era, but I have understood that dating is also, there are other datings. But to summarize then, the Dharma that is laid out in Manu's Dharma Shastra concerns each Varna and each ashrama life stage, so each caste and each life stage. It starts with a cosmogony or creation, then defines dharma, then describes the samskara rites, initiation to the study of Veda, then treats marriage, hospitality, funeral rites, dietary rules, pollution and purification, etc., the conduct of women and wives, the law of kings, charity and rites of reparation, and doctrines of karma, soul, and open brackets, hell. And I'm looking specifically here at the law of kings, which then, according to my source, covers 18 juridical topics. I'm giving just a few examples here. And the king is, the word for king is Raja, because his dharma is to make his subjects happy. Yeah. So his duties then, or obligations, involve maintaining overall equilibrium and balance between individuals, to protect the weak against the attacks of the strong. This is an important topic later on, we'll see. It also treats limits on royal power, rules for contracts, and specifies that the king should preside as judge in regular legal proceedings, and that the wronged in a legal proceeding should have direct access to the king. So, what does all this have to do for actual politics then, imperial politics? Well, as we know, Muslim conquests of northern India began early in Islamic history. So during the Umayyad dynasty caliphate, which ruled from Damascus between 661 and 750, conquests of the area Sindh began in 711. Then the successors to the caliphate, the Abbasid dynasty, who ruled from Baghdad between 750 and 1258, they incorporated Al-Sindh as a caliphal province, and it remained as a province to the Abbasid Caliphate until around 900. And then in the period 900 to 1500 Common Era, it was under Arab dynastic rules, so more autonomous in relation to the Abbasid Caliphate. So the contact between the Arab Muslims and northern India starts early in Islamic history. This is just a map over the Abbasid Caliphate and its trade routes, somehow just to illustrate the point that was made, that globalization and international trade in a way is not necessarily a modern phenomenon if you trust this internet-derived map that I have here. So I now move on to the first Muslim scholar I selected as an example of the significance of India, Ibn al-Muqaffa. So he, in terms of then the discourse analysis model, his institution that he was working within was the caliphal administration. So he was working in the overlap between the Umayyad and the Abbasid dynasties, and he was a scribe, so a bureaucrat administrator within the caliphate. The disciplines he worked within include political science, which addresses issues such as the common good, what is it, and how is it known? who has lawmaking authority? Is it the ruler or the jurists? And concerning the law, how does the law protect the common good? History discipline he also worked within and wrote history over especially the Persian imperial pre-Islamic dynasties, trying to figure out how does royal history illustrate the common good. His subjective personal analysis then is that principles of the common good derive from divine knowledge. Historically, the knowledge comes from an Indian philosopher sage and then was conveyed through Persian kingship and prophetic revelation to the caliphate. And in terms of law, he argues that the function of law is to implement this divine knowledge for the good of all subjects. He then wrote, I'm focusing on two of his treatises within political science, one in Arabic, Kalila wa Dimna, which is a kind of dialogical work where animals dialogue about kingship. And according to the sources, it is modeled on the Indian Panchatantra, which is dated in its turn to between 100 and 500 Common Era. And there he argues that the divine knowledge has Indian origins, and it implies that the king should be the lawmaker and protector of the common good. The king needs advice from scholars, and they deliver the advice in the form of parables or examples, because examples will make the king think he has reached the conclusion himself, which is important. He mustn't be annoyed, because then he can have you beheaded or something disastrous like that. So this is the wisdom that he conveys in this particular treatise, Kalila wa Dimna. He also has a treatise in Arabic, Risala fiya Sahaba, so an epistle or treatise on companionship, which is about the caliph's rights and obligations, where he defines the common good as equitable land tax also, and especially for the peasants' sake. And he argues that the caliph should be the lawmaker, and that protects the common good. And then, as in Kalila wa Dimna, the caliph's scholarly companions should advise him accordingly in this lawmaking process, but he is the one who actually issues the laws. Our next scholar is my favorite then, At-Tabari, who worked within the institution of the legal scholars, the learned men, who in Arabic is named al-ulama, those who possess scientific knowledge. And this scientific knowledge is based on or derived from the divine knowledge in the Quran. He himself developed his own law school with its own legal methodology. But the disciplines I'm concerned with here are particularly history, asking how does royal history illustrate the common good, and Quran exegesis or commentary on the Quran, which is about knowing what the meaning of the Quran is and how it can be attained. He also worked within jurisprudence. What are the sources of the law is one of the questions, and how does the law protect the common good? And Tabari's subjective analysis is that the common good consists in equitable land tax, like Ibn al-Muqaffa, also for the peasants. So they have shared this analysis. If the land tax is not equitable, Tabari shows, the empire will crumble and the people will suffer. And it is not the ruler's lawmaking, but the scholar's lawmaking, in his view, that protects the common good. And then what about India? Well, India appears in his history, Tarikh ar-Rusul wal-Muluk, or the history of messengers and kings. And this history starts by describing divine creation and covenant. So developing this Quranic idea of covenant between God and Adam's offspring in a historical context. And he narrates how Adam, who was together with Eve in the garden with God and the angels, but then he sins, he disobeys God and therefore falls from the garden and lands in India. From India, he proceeds to Mecca, guided by the angel Gabriel. And there he founds the place for the Kaaba temple and the practice of circumambulating or walking around the Kaaba. And the whole symbolism of standing at the Kaaba means that you're actually able to be in contact with God, who sits on his throne right above that place. So by doing this, Adam can kind of re-establish the contact that was broken when he fell from the garden. And after this, Tabari continues to narrate the history of prophets, kings, and caliphs, and so on, including the biblical Israelite kingship, the Persian kingship, the Romans to some extent, and then various Arab pre-Islamic kingdoms, and into Islamic prophet and Islamic history. And one of his sources here is Ibn al-Muqaffa, the scribe. And then, if we turn to his Quran exegesis, Jami'ul Bayan an Ta'wil al-Quran, or the comprehensive explanation of the original meaning of the signs of the Quran, he argues that the meaning of the Quran is one and encompasses the whole scripture, and that is the reality of the divine covenant and its case-by-case implications. And he also advances the theory that human rights and obligations derive from divine creation, and we will soon see this concretely. And he then, by interpreting the Quran, defines or explains the meaning of the divine knowledge in relation to historical cases of human responses to covenant as conveyed by prophets. And third brief example is from a legal treatise of his called Ikhtilaf al-Fuqaha, which is a survey of legal topics and Muslim jurists' either agreements or disagreements about them. And here India surfaces again, because the scholars, they were arguing, okay, Jews and Christians have rights on account of them being people of written scripture, like the Muslims. They have the Torah, the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, and they have the Gospels. So they have specific rights and obligations. But do the same principles apply to the polytheistic peoples of India and the Zoroastrians? And the scholars broadly agree that yes, the same rights and duties apply to the Indian people as the Jews and the Christians, even though polytheism as such is not really tolerated by the Quran, allegedly. But we will perhaps discuss what the meaning of this is. If we look at Tabari's history in some detail, and specifically his reports on India and Adam, there are 7 reports, including the following ones. And first, I show that Tabari always begins his reports by citing the authorities who have transmitted this report. So he says, from Ibn Sinan, from Al-Hajjaj, from Hamad ibn Salama, from Ali ibn Zayd, Yusuf ibn Mihran, Ibn Abbas, and Ali ibn Abi Talib, that is the Prophet's cousin and the father of Hussein. Quote, the land with the sweetest smell on earth is the land of India. When Adam was cast down there, some of the smell of the garden clung to India's trees. And then he cites another report from Ibn Humayd and Salama and Ibn Ishaq. The people of the Torah, that is the Hebrew Bible, on their part said, Adam was cast down in India upon a mountain called Wasim. Others said, rather, Adam was cast down in Sarandib or Sri Lanka upon a mountain called Nud. So Tabari then proceeds to assess these reports, and this shows his epistemology clearly. He says, the soundness of this can be established only by a report serving as conclusive proof, but no such report on this subject, i.e. Sri Lanka, is known to have been transmitted, except the report about Adam having been cast down in India. Its soundness is rejected neither by the Muslim scholars nor by the people of the Torah and the Gospel. Proof is firmly established by reports from some of them. So his historical epistemology is very empiricist. It's based on written sources, which are individual reports with solid authorities here. So the Sri Lanka claim can be refuted because he does not have any written reports. Whereas that Adam landed in India, this has been certified through reports also from the Jews and the Christians. Now I'm nearing the end. So I will give you briefly an example from Tabari's Quran exegesis of his human rights declaration, as I call it. And I will try to connect this to the issue of India towards the end. So commenting on this surah we saw before, Surah 4, Women and Nisa, which starts with a verse on divine creation, Tabari develops a theory of human rights, which is a natural law theory here. So the Surah 4 verse 1 begins, O people, fulfill your obligations towards your Lord who created you by dividing one person and thereby distinguishing from it its other half. Tabari then explains this and says, God means by his speech, O people, fulfill your obligations towards your Lord, etc. the following. He described himself as the uniquely one who has divided up all the diverse beings from one individual to let his servants know how he issued forth all that from one person. Thus, he informs them that since they are all offspring of one man and one mother and are therefore all from one another, they are obligated to uphold each other's rights as brothers. They are made to act kindly, not oppressively towards each other, so that the strong uphold the rights of the weak in accordance with what God has commanded them. Now, in terms of natural law theory, we can see here how Tabari establishes a moral standard for the law by referring to divine creation, as Anver Emon defines it. God created humans as a universal brotherhood with rights and obligated the strong to protect the rights of the weak. This is the moral standard of the law. It has a common good aspect because the law should protect rights against oppression. Epistemologically, we know about this moral standard from the Quran, which is the written scripture. And the fact, the absolutely true fact here, is the divine creation itself. God has created man as one human family, and from this Tabari develops that moral standard. And I find this passage, his exegesis, fascinating. I don't have time to make the comparison here, but its wordings, when compared with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from the United Nations from 1948, there are some striking similarities in wordings here, except that the UN one is, of course, so-called secular, doesn't mention God, but still. To summarize the significances of India, again, the final rather inhumane table that I am forcing upon you here. If we start to the left, the column on natural law theory, we can see the Quran's divine knowledge, again, creates a moral standard for the law from the fact that God has created all humans from one person. In the Tabari's version, this means that all humans have rights, though different. Adam, the first human being, he went to India before founding the Kaaba. And he is among those jurists who argues that Hindus or the Indian peoples have the same rights as the people of scripture. They're all human beings. They all have rights and obligations in his reasoning, which follows from his human rights declaration in a way. Epistemologically, the Quran and its divine knowledge is known empirically through the written scripture. In Ibn al-Mukaffa's case, we can see that the legal and administrative implications of the divine knowledge is known through Indian and Persian historical records. And it is the same knowledge in these Indian and Persian records as in the Quranic prophetic revelation, he argues. So Indian sage knowledge equals Quranic prophetic knowledge, according to Ibn al-Mukaffa. Ontologically, human being is divine covenant, which implies mutual contractual rights and obligations between God and man and in the law. So the law should be based on this as well. Now, literary genres involved here. And there we can, I've chosen to start with Manu's Dharma Shastra here because it is about law, quotes unquote, in this sense. It starts with creation and then takes the form of dialogue on Vedas Dharma between teacher and disciple in metric verse, if I've understood correctly, including on kingship. The Quranic genre isn't a dialogue, it's topical, though there are some aspects of dialogue in it. It is otherwise in rhythmic prose with end rhymes about divine knowledge and with narrations of creation interspersed in it. Ibn al-Mukaffa's treatise Kalila wa Dimna, which is both Quranic divine knowledge and Indian sage knowledge, takes the form of a dialogue between animals about kingship from the Panchatantra. Tabari's history, like the Hebrew Bible for that matter, starts with creation and then defines the covenant and specifies this point that Adam came first to India before he established the Islamic place for pilgrimage at the Kaaba. And then from that follows the political history based on reports. So there is no way of saying that, okay, there is a particular genre that conveys natural law theory, epistemology, and ontology in any particular way. But rather, one can see several generic forms, but they convey nevertheless natural law theory through the focus on creation on the one hand, and the relationship between creation and law, following from that as a moral standard. And then it seems very important to these Islamic scholars that India is sort of drawn into the Quranic and Islamic legal sphere through these references to either an Indian sage or to Adam falling down in India. Now, there is an imperial context, of course, because both for Ibn al-Muqaffa and at-Tabari, the conquests of northern India were a reality.
Ma'am, could you please unmute yourself? So, ma'am, please unmute your microphone. Can you hear me? Please unmute yourself. Yeah. Ma'am, you have again muted your microphone. Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is a good sign that my time is out. Yeah. So I think I was on the imperial implications of including India in the divine and Islamic knowledge sphere and legal sphere. So it is an imperial effort, obviously, but it is one which doesn't try to say that everything that is different from what we have is problematic and should be sidelined as a knowledge source. It is rather emphasizing that we need to include this knowledge in our Islamic knowledge, if you see my point. And this is of course, very different strategy to what is prevalent in the Nordic countries with reference to Islamic knowledge and theory. And I would also like to add then that this, shall we say, early Islamic legal knowledge is very, in some ways, pluralistic in its orientation. It includes the different religions, the different imperial legacies in its body of knowledge. So this, even though in the modern context, the Islamic legal, scholarly, and even nobility side has had a very powerful legacy of inclusiveness and adaptation and accommodation to the different cultures and imperial legacies and religions within the Islamic, let's say, imperial sphere, even though obviously Islam was the hegemonic law and religion in that sense. The absolute truth is the Quran, but this absolute truth also includes, as it said in Surah 4, the people who went before. So this is my finally last word. I thank you so much for your patience. I know this was a too long talk and also far too ignorant on the Indian materials, and I apologize for some probably very crude representations. Thank you.
You're most welcome, and thank you so much for this analytical and informative discourse on Quranic laws. And we have one question for you. This is from, can you hear me? This is from Shantanu De. So I'm reading this question.
Yes.
how do you read the moral concept of common good with the triple categorization of non-Muslims into Al-e-Kitab, Musabiya al-e-Kitab, and Mashrikin? I'm sorry if I pronounce it wrongly.
Mm-hmm.
Hope you
So,
have answered.
Ahl al-Kitab, and the second one was?
Musabiya al-e-Kitab and
Mushrikun, the third.
third Mushrikun. Yeah.
Okay. I'll start with Ahl al-Kitab. So this is in the Quranic context, the Ahl al-Kitab are the people who share scriptures with the Muslims, and it's the Jews and the Christians, because they have the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, and the Gospels, or Injil in Arabic. And they are said to be earlier revelations of the same truth, though they corrupted it, but still the same revelation as the Quran. So they are called Ahl al-Kitab, people of scripture, who share this tradition and sort of have the same, they are in the same revelatory line, let's say. But in the legal sphere, then, this is what makes them part of the Muslim political community, and with a special contract that they have the rights to their religion, to their own legal autonomy in legal spheres that don't concern state level. And they also have protection of their lives, their property, etc., by the Islamic law. Now, the interesting thing is then that the Muslim jurists included the Indian religions in that same category as the Jews and the Christians. And Ibn al-Muqaffa was really developing a paradigm, I think, for doing that, by arguing the compatibility of the Indian sage knowledge with the Quranic prophetic knowledge. The second term I did not understand, and I apologize for that, but mushrikun is a very important question, because mushrik means someone who shares God with other partners, who ascribes partners to God in a way, which can be interpreted doctrinally as meaning that you worship other gods, or, alongside God himself, in which case it becomes polemics against forms of religion that are perceived to be polytheistic in a way. So even the Christian Trinity can fall under that kind of critique in the Quran. But it also has to do with contractual loyalty. So a mushrik that is problematic is when this fact of sharing God with other partners means that you are not loyal to the contract that you are obligated by. So somehow it seems to me that mushrik, you can be taught, you can be allowed to be what the Quran considers problematic doctrinal position. You can have that as long as you keep your contract. So the Christians who were considered doctrinally problematic because of the Trinity, they were still legitimate contract partners with the Muslim rulers and in the categories of Islamic law, even though theologically and doctrinally Muslim theology rejected the Trinity, just as it rejected other forms of quote unquote polytheism. I hope I'm able to make this point clear, because I think it's important that there can be theological and doctrinal polemics at one level, but politically and legally important is whether you keep the terms of a contract or not. And that contract you can have despite doctrinal polemics.
Thank you so much. And I also have a query, but due to the paucity of time, as our next speaker is waiting, so I will surely mail you my query or question. So thank you so much, Dr. Urika, for this
Thank you.
enlightening session.
Thank
And
you.
now we are proceeding towards our third session or the last session for day 5. And I would like to request Dr. Sheikh Makbul Islam sir to kindly take over the session, please.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So the last speaker is Dr. Abhishek Ghosh. Dr. Abhishek Ghosh, and the title of his paper is South Asian Studies, Interdisciplinary Research Methods. So I would like to request our team to please give brief introduction about Dr. Ghosh. To please read out his brief bio note, please.
Thank you so much, sir.
Because you can see only moon in the sky. It is totally dark here. Okay.
Sure, sir. It is
Okay,
our
please.
privilege to read out the bio. Dr. Krishna Abhishek Ghosh is a professor of Hinduism and world religions at Grand Valley State University, Michigan, and an affiliate professor at the Global Center for Advanced Studies, New York, USA. His interdisciplinary research and teaching interests include the history of religions, Indian philosophy, and aesthetics, Russia, post-colonial and critical theories, and South Asian studies. His current research projects revolve around the intellectual history of Kirtan with a famous focus on Bengal. This focus has developed from his doctoral work on Hindu thinker Kedarnath Dotto Bhaktivinoda, for which he received his PhD from the University of Chicago in 2014. He also taught in Asian classics. He also taught Asian classics at U Chicago's Graham School for Continuing Liberal and Professional Studies, for which he received the Dean's Award in 2013. The Vaishnava roots of his family and Bengal culture hold a special place in his heart and form a significant part of his scholarly activity. He teaches undergraduate and graduate courses such as Gandhi and his critics, Hinduism 101, Cow, Caste, and the Kama Sutra, an introduction to religious studies and world religions, and he supervises PhD students in his areas of expertise. Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Okay, so I would like to extend our salutation to Professor Ghosh, Dr. Ghosh, and invite him to give his presentation.
Is everybody able to hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
First of all, good morning from the other side of the planet. And I'm very grateful to Professor Makbul Islam for introducing me and for presiding over this session. I'm also very grateful to my colleague, Dr. Tinni Goswami, and for organizing this, and to Shrimanti Ghoshal for that very wonderful introduction. I see a few of my friends here in the virtual audience. I don't see you, but I see your names. And I'm very grateful to all of you who are here today. I would also like to congratulate Dr. Ulrika for that very enlightening presentation. And as you can imagine, I'm, it's fairly early in the morning here, so I have not been able to take full advantage of the faculty development program because of a difference in time zones. But without further ado, I'd like to launch into what I had prepared for today. Now, the topic of my discussion today is interdisciplinary research methods. But since I have been given the privilege of technically having the last word, so to say, in the last session, I wanted to launch into my theoretical conversation with a practical story I once heard from my doctoral advisor, Wendy Doniger, who is famous or infamous, however you want to put it. But once upon a time in 2013, November, exactly about 7 years back, my parents were visiting, and I heard the story about one of the founding fathers of Bengal studies, Edward Dimmock, and how he had traveled to Kolkata over a long period of time in the 1960s with 4 children. And now he had telegrammed the doorkeeper of his residence saying that he would arrive really late, and requested him to stay awake so that he could keep the gate open, because if you are traveling with 4 children and your wife over a period of more than 35 hours door to door, you're not exactly very energetic and fresh at the end of the journey. As it would happen, after he reached Kolkata, the gatekeeper fell asleep. And despite ringing the bell many times, he wouldn't wake up. And Professor Dimmock, who was an expert in Bangla, started using very interesting Bangla expletives, galagali. And after a long time, when the doorkeeper woke up, finally opened the door, Professor Dimmock was very upset. And he continued with his barrage of beautiful Bengali words. To which the doorkeeper, instead of being offended, looked in surprise and said, "Babu, apnar Bangla ki bhalo," or "Babu, your Bengali is so awesome." Now, I tell that story to point out how discourse, no matter what emotions are embedded in it, changes semantic fields, changes its meaning as it goes from context to context, that is, changes cultural contexts. What is suffering and a barrage of Bengali words that expresses the pain of that suffering to Professor Dimmock means something very different to the doorkeeper. It means that somebody has learned his language well enough to be able to understand poetry and also use expletives whenever he wants. Now, I'm not going to tell you what those expletives were, but I did hear them when Wendy told me the story. But I also want to kind of draw that story as a metaphor to talk about how research works, how research methods are important in any kind of research we do, and why interdisciplinarity is an important factor when we focus on the area that scholars have deemed to be South Asia, and then we narrow a little further and focus on cultural studies. And if I were to take a big leap here, I would say that religious studies, or the academic study of religion, to quote Wendy, is the ultimate form of cultural studies. right? But as we move forward in our own scholarly careers, producing knowledge for next generations, defining, archiving the materials that we come across, we want to be practitioners of what I call epistemic humility. In the past, we have seen the knowledge disciplines that we have today, such as history, anthropology, biological sciences, and so on and so forth, were developments that happened within Western academia in about the 18th and 19th centuries. So even though the production, the categorization, and the dissemination of knowledge fields is as old as any civilization we look at, the particular way in which we study these in universities across the world, and I must say that Indian universities have been fashioned after Western universities, and we don't have traditional modes of learning as a part of mainstream education as it used to be in pre-colonial times. So as we grow these disciplines, as we function within them, as we get faculty positions, as we write books and teach courses, what are our presumptions is the first question. And to refer back to the story about Professor Dimmock and the doorkeeper, what are some of the power structures that are embedded in these discourses that we must be aware of? Especially when we undertake interdisciplinary, which disciplines do we include? Which do we exclude? And why are the big questions that we must all answer and reckon with the fact that any scholarship we produce is provisional. And as my main argument of today's talk, and I've said this before, warrants epistemic humility. To know that no matter what we do, our work will never be perfect and complete, and it is a process. Right? Now, getting into the specifics of it, the one thing I wanted to mention, and I must excuse myself a little earlier because I wasn't sure that today's program started a little late, and I had a few things scheduled right after this meeting. But I'll try to kind of leave enough time for questions and answers. The major factor that we must ask today as scholars located in South Asia is the question of our power dynamics with the rest of the global academic world. This means that we must take into account some of the fault lines that exist because of political and economic factors that impact the quality and the nature of the research we undertake in the humanities and social sciences in India. And I'll start with one small example about the disparity that scholars in South Asia often face when engaging with scholars from outside of the region. And this example pertains to publications and keeping important knowledge and information behind paywalls. We all know as scholars, private publishers, and I'm not going to name them, often publish their books for $100, $200, $300, $500 at a time. And it takes years before these books sometimes become available in South Asia. Now, if we look into economics and the question of purchasing power parity, and I'll explain that economic term very briefly, we see that scholars in South Asia are disadvantaged to begin with. And they get a syndrome like that of the doorkeeper. In the sense, no matter what the critique is, the fact that we are able to engage in a robust global conversation becomes more important because of the drawbacks of having a currency that's weaker than the US dollar and operating in a sphere, in an intellectual sphere, where we are invited to play a game where the rules have been set without our consultation to begin with, and the game has already started and we are joining in late. So, in terms of purchasing power parity, and here's a concrete example, one book that comes out from a private US or European publisher, say at $300, will probably cost 21,000 rupees in India. Now, no scholar has that kind of a budget, and universities and libraries will cringe at purchasing that material for the scholars who are there. Now, by virtue of the lack of access to those materials, the scholarship that emerges out of India is often seen as quote unquote backward, outdated, and instead of looking at systemic fault lines that kind of circumvent scholars in South Asia from engaging fully with their global partners, the blame often is put squarely on the practitioners rather than systems. The second issue that I wanted to speak about today, when it comes to interdisciplinarity, are the questions surrounding India being a post-colonial nation, South Asia being a post-colonial region, and the question of decoloniality. And a major question, I think, we as scholars should ask ourselves, whether we are of South Asian origin functioning abroad or presently in South Asia, is the question of power in the formation of knowledge disciplines, and whether we are regurgitating some of the core foundations of imperialist structures that have been left behind in the academic systems that we now inherit in a post-colonial nation and region. And I think that the time has come for us to have a much broader conversation about post-colonialism, about decoloniality, especially in relation to some of the most pressing questions of the day, as we try and value indigenous methods of knowing our own materials, of teaching them, producing knowledge, and disseminating. Again, a concrete example there is a student of literature in India studying in an English department, at least in the departments that I have been to when I did my English major back in the day, had to study more British and American literature than Indian writing in English. There was hardly any Caribbean authors. There were hardly any African authors. And the nature of the discourse was primarily Eurocentric or Euro-America-centric, to begin with. My question then is, why can't a Gangesha or a Bhatrihari be read in their own light? And why must theorists like Max Weber or Karl Marx, those are classical, and even more contemporary theorists such as historian Carlo Ginzburg, or the anthropologist, and I didn't write down the name here, who had a very famous article on the Javanese cockfight. Pardon my memory. Why should these theories be the sole or the dominant lenses through which students and scholars in South Asia must look at their own text? Right? Now that means in order to decolonize our fields, there is a great need for intellectuals in the region, even at a very micro level, to go back to the indigenous texts, methods, and cultures, and use them as lenses, as we have used Western lenses to look at our own traditions. Right? And I must kind of add one more point to this, and I'll end with this. About the discipline of history, because few of us here are historians. I am personally a historian of religion by training. And we must understand that the Rankian way of doing history, where chronology is key and other modes of remembering the past is often relegated to the back burner, must be revisited. And I refer specifically to the work of Ranajit Guha, especially the small book called History at the Limit of World History, and a chapter called The Poet's Reprise, about how Rabindranath Tagore looked at the mode of history writing in South Asia. A generation before him, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, who was an important influencer of his times, made statements like, and I quote, I kind of summarize, that we do not have a scientist going up a mountain with a barometer to measure air pressure. A yogi might have looked into the skies and say, it's a little moist today. We as Indians did not write history. We don't have history. And that particular statement from Bankim Chandra Chatterjee goes back to a Hegelian version of what history is. Now that's a much larger conversation for another time. But my point in discussing this is to uncover some of the constraints that underlie our practice and our research methods of not only analyzing our existing cultures as they become history, as we curate what we think needs to be preserved for the future, and silo things that we think should not warrant major importance. As we undertake research and we teach our own students how to do research in the field, I would urge my colleagues, my friends, my students, and other thinkers and leaders within the academy to rethink the surety with which we do our research and create space for epistemic humility, number one. Number two, question the presumptions that underlie no matter what methods we choose. Number 3, understand that as we grow into the future in the 21st century, the knowledge disciplines that we have inherited have already started to follow the seams, thus warranting an interdisciplinary research approach. Number 3. Number 4, to understand how indigenous methods actually can contribute as much to the understanding of indigenous materials as much as Western lenses. And number 5, to understand history as a discipline, but yet take it with a pinch of salt. And I want to conclude by evoking the story I started with about 2 individuals who have an intercultural encounter in the middle of a night somewhere in South Kolkata. And both are trying to express their views, but it appears that as they are trying to communicate, their emotions overtake their arguments. But such is the nature of discourse. And to the stellar of the story, I owe another metaphor to conclude. In research, we can have a toolbox approach where, depending on the material we are studying, we use a particular tool. And just like in Indian medicine, patients take homeopathic today, allopathic tomorrow, some Unani here, and some other forms of therapy there. Instead of being stuck in the method itself, the idea behind interdisciplinary research, especially in the context of South Asia, warrants this toolbox approach, where we look at issues as composite issues rather than something disparate, and approach these issues in a way that respects indigeneity, that is interdisciplinary, that is aware of power structures, and that creates a new narrative, which is not just an alternative, but something that exists in its own right. I thank you very much, and thank you to the organizers of this FDP. I have a few minutes here to hear any comments, thoughts, corrections. If you think that there are any questions that you may have for me to kind of reflect on, any ideas that you needed to clarify, I'm here. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Dr. Abhishek Ghosh, for your thought-provoking presentation. Actually, you have pointed out more than one issues, like use of indigenous methodological concept. That is one point. And basically, the main point is to write the history, or the approach of writing history, which is historiography. So you have made us aware about what should be the principle of historiographic method to rewrite, to rethink, or to revisit the history of Asian continent. So since we have another session, we can take some questions. And so can you, Madam, can you read any question? Is there any question in the chat box?
Actually, in the chat box, sir, there are praises like how the people are mesmerized, or they are so much engrossed, and they are now trying to resituate or reanalyze their previous positions on South Asian studies, I guess, because I haven't seen any question in the chat box. But with my meager understanding and limited knowledge, I would like to ask, it's not a question, like it's a query from novice. So, sir, I would like to know, so please excuse me if I sound meaningless. So, how can we trace the genre of South Asian studies in regard of the broader understanding of Foucault, where knowledge is considered as power? And secondly, the construction of South Asian studies, as you have mentioned about Ranajit Guha, that means you were harping on the subaltern uh, stance. That means we should also consider Gramsci, who is considered as the father of subaltern studies, as how he coined the term proletariat as like the mass. So do you think, is there any kind of Indian contribution or any kind of Indian impetus for the formulating of this entire discourse on South Asian studies, or it's purely a product of Western discourse or of Western intellectual ideas, or intellectual, what I can say, like mm, thought provoking exchanges of what I can say, like intellectual ideas, or a change of like, or uh, uh, an attempt to see the East with some new insights, but which are purely with some Western, which are purely based on some Western ideas. So I'm sorry if I sound
No, no,
something
these are all
futile,
good reflections and
but
questions. Thank you.
thank you
How
so
much
much.
time do I have to answer this?
So, sir, we have one more session after that, like after your lecture. So, you can take 5 to 10 minutes. It's up to you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, how to trace the genre, or so to say, the field of South Asian studies, and with particular reference to Foucault's idea of knowledge and power. The the departments of South Asian studies that exists in post-war Western academia, and the funding that came in to run these departments, is a legacy of the Cold War, because area studies developed in the West when the United States, which was an emergent power after the Second World War, decided that they needed to know as much as they could about, say, Near East, or what they call Near East, or Slavic departments, South Asian studies departments. And so that's where the origins of South Asia studies in the post-war situation. But if you go back to kind of pre-war developments, this Harvard University had a Sanskrit chair, Yale had a Sanskrit department chair, Oxford and Cambridge had kind of this old classical Orientalists studying South Asia in their own way. And the reason in the pre-war situation, the reason behind the study of South Asia was primarily to train people who would become agents of colonialism in South Asia. And there was no Pakistan or Bangladesh, or the borders were fairly porous. And there itself is this idea of holding on to kind of specific knowledge in order to have power over a population, on who kind of becomes the data from which that knowledge is gathered, right? So if we look at some of the colonial literature on how different people in India were portrayed, right? You'll see pictures of this is what a fisherman looks like. This is what a housewife looks like. These are the books they are reading. And there was always this idea of us and them, right? The Occident and the Orient. But I must say that even this division of East and West, and if we kind of follow the arguments that have been developing over a long period of time, and I'd, for example, refer to India and Europe, an essay in understanding by Wilhelm Haltfass, for example. These dichotomies, these binaries are created. They're artificial, right? And so one question I ask all of my students, for example, is, sitting here, we call Arab countries the Middle East, but it's Middle East from whose perspective, right? Who is defining that knowledge is a big question. So to refer back to Foucault, I would invoke another metaphor from Foucault, and that of the Panopticon, where you have a tower, and on the top of a tower you have an observatory where the person who has power sits and looks at all of the other people who are in various cells, and they cannot see him, but he can see them, right? And so what happens in knowledge production, where the idea is to be able to maintain hegemony, is the people that the knowledge producers are studying, or the methods of the knowledge producers, isn't always for the benefit of the people that they're studying. Right. Number two, in terms of Gramsci, the basic Gramscian idea is to have history from below. And if we look at some of the primary materials that comes up from that kind of time and place, he's reflecting on why the revolution that he believed in so much had failed, and what were some of the flaws in that particular genre of Marxist thinking. Now, I think that post-colonial studies, and both of us invoked Ranajit Guha and the Subaltern Studies Collective, they have done their bit. They have made their mark. But it's also a question for us to inherit, to reflect on, and to contribute to as we move forward, right? And it's not just about Gramsci, it's not about just the Subaltern Collective. It harkens back to the Frankfurt School, for example, where the purpose of academic or intellectual engagement is for the emancipation of humankind, right? Now, that's a very big project, but it doesn't hurt to take baby steps towards it. And how do we ensure that? And this is something I address in some of my scholarship that has come up last year and still coming up this year and next, is the question of how we slowly disentangle some of the power structures that has so far limited the scope of how we do South Asian studies, for lack of a better word, sitting in South Asia, right? Now, the next point, in order to answer your question is about how this you mentioned attempt to see a Western kind of, from a Western perspective, what we call the East. So in terms of that question, I must say that again, those binaries are Western constructs. This is not what self-identity was. And I must acknowledge at this point that self-identity of any group of people, any community, has always shifted over time, right? Now, having said that, I must also point to the fact that Western constructs have often also been taken up by indigenous people for their own benefit. And the blatant classic example in that regard is the term Hinduism. Now, the word Hindu has been around for a long time, but the ism slapped at the bottom of Hindu and turning it into a world religion, quote unquote. And I particularly refer to the work of Tomoko Masuzawa, The Invention of World Religions, when I speak about this, is a great metaphor for how South Asian studies work, right? Now, as a region, India got partitioned in the late 1940s. The various kingdoms and territories that were under foreign rule, the Portuguese and the French gradually joined the Indian Union by force or by diplomacy. That's another question. But the fact remains that this term, South Asia, and the popularization of that term began in Western academia. And so far, it has become a polished intellectual version of the more proletariat word, and since you use that word, the proletariat word, desi, right? So what we consider desi in colloquial terms becomes South Asia in academic terms, right? But that doesn't take away the fact that these are categories that has been created in Western intellectual circles by people in positions of power. And I will end answering that question with a small question on my end. That is, when we talk about humanism, for example, we talk about Enlightenment humanism, right? We refer back to Europe. We refer back to the French Revolution. We refer back to British democracy as we identify define our democracies. Have we not ever thought of looking back at poets like Chandidash, who was there much before Chaitanya and who came up with the term or with the idea Shobar upor manushotto, right? The category of the human is above all. Now, if we say that is Chandidash's humanism, then we are lessening Chandidash. Why can't a Chandidash exist by himself in his own right and be studied for the genius that he is? Why can't we study Chandidash like Chaitanya did? Why must we always think of Chandidash in terms of a European phenomena? And a related question that I was asked when I first started my graduate career, I wrote the word medieval India, and that's a coin that's that's a term that's often thrown around. And my other graduate mentor, Deepesh Chakraborty, asked me, Abhishek, does India really have a medieval age? Or are we just trying to understand Indian history solely through Western lenses, right? And that was a deep question. I haven't yet answered that. But my answer has been long and long-winded. And my answer has been that question. Why can't we study a Bhartrihari, a Chandidash, on their own as individuals and thinkers that are as towering as Aristotle or Plato or anybody else that have become a staple in our academic diets? So I hope I was able to answer or reflect on your questions, Dr. Goswami, and I hope that was useful.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abhishek Ghosh, for your beautiful clarification. And we are going to wind up this session. And we have another session that is valedictory session. So in this session, 3 papers have been presented. The first 2 papers somehow relates to Muslim and Islam. The first paper was presented, basically try to focus on the unwritten heritage, on the basis of unwritten heritage, that is folk song. And the second paper that was presented by Ulrika Madam was on the basis of written document like Quran and Islamic law. And the third paper, particularly, it is not a paper, rather I would like to say he presented a very big discourse and so many questions with reference to Asian studies, with reference to writing history, with reference to the necessity of indigenous model to interpret, to perceive or to analyze Indian culture, like that. So I would like to extend my thankfulness to all the paper presenters and uh, 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 extend a very cordial greetings on behalf of the four collaborating institutions to all the five esteemed speakers. So now we are going to start the last session, that is valedictory session. After 5 days, this is the fifth day, and we have come at an end of this 5-day workshop on research methodology. Now, with on behalf of my part, I would like to express my gratitude to the organizers of this workshop for giving me this opportunity to chair this session. And now I would like to hand over the microphone to Tinni Madam to continue the next phase of the program.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. So now we will be having a session before our valedictory address by Father Reverend Johnson Padiera, Vice Principal, Raghabpur Campus, St. Xavier's College, Autonomous, Kolkata. So in this session, we have chosen 4 participants, and these participants, they are requested to share their experiences about this FDP. So due to the paucity of time, we are allotting 5 minutes to each participant. So first I would like to uh, invite Dr. Snehal Donde. So ma'am, are you there? Dr. Snehal Donde, ma'am, are you there? Dr. Snehal Donde. So ma'am, could you please unmute yourself? Dr. Snehal Donde, I would like to request our technical team, could you please unmute Dr. Snehal Donde?
Yes, Madam Tini, yes.
Yes.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. And ma'am, please share your experiences about this FDP. And I'm sorry, due to the paucity of time, we can only give you 5 minutes for the same.
Yeah, that's okay, madam. I'll not take even 5 minutes. I know there are very good speakers, and already we have so much mesmerized that our speaking after so much eminent speakers, it will not make sense. But then it's, I know, customary that we have to give the feedback. And I'm so much privileged that you have given me an opportunity. So first of all, my thanks to all the organizers, those Department of History of Raghabpur campus, and then BRC, Jagannath Research Center, Kolkata Society of Asian Studies, Department of Ethnology. I can only say here the galaxy of speakers which were there for this particular FDP really made the level of this particular FDP a very high level, because I have already 2 PhDs, let me tell you, and now I'm doing in the third in humanities.
Ma'am, if you kindly introduce yourself, like then it will be really a great honor for us. Hello, ma'am, could you please unmute yourself? Ma'am, Dr. Snehal Donde, could you please unmute yourself? Yeah, ma'am, can you hear me?
Yes,
ma'am, could you
madam.
please introduce yourself? So
Yes, actually, host is making me muted, so I'm going in mute.
I'm
So
sorry.
Sorry for that. Yeah, I'm Dr. Snehal Donde. I also am a research scholar of Bhaktivedanta Vidyapit Research Center, as well as I'm a principal of degree college affiliated to Mumbai University. I am presently pursuing my research work in one of the Ganga studies related to cultural and religious studies. I attended this particular FDP with the intention to know about what are the apt social science methodologies that I will be able to, apply to my studies, and then in the cultural sense also. But I'm very, very happy that the way this flow of all the sessions happen, and the theme which was selected as the revisiting culture and the and religion, with the doing a lot of dialogues on different aspects and the facets for the investigation. It was really very well designed, this FDP, and the topics which were also selected, they have given very much in-depth idea about how we can go about the research, and in a very systematic manner. Let me tell you, as I mentioned, that I have already done 2 PhDs, but still I feel always a lot of lacunae in my work. And I'm very much privileged that I was also, my mentors are Dr. Heberman, then Abhishek Ghosh, and all these people are already guided me a lot. And I'm very, very thankful that now even the other participants got the blessings of these people, because these are the kind of speakers in this particular FDP, the kind of speakers they were there. They have given us such a lot of multidimensional perspectives to how to look at the broader aspects of the research, and how we have to take care while proceeding with our research work also, and which is very, very essential in the present context when UGC is expecting all of us to connect our studies to the community. And the first, I also could hear Dr. Amit Dey's lecture of perspectives of folk culture in colonial Bengal. So these kind of lectures and these kind of sessions really has given us a very much in-depth ideas that how we can systematically look at the research. Abhishek Ghosh, I can tell you, the way he has been, training us and mentoring us, he has shown us that how we can, work in a very challenging situations. Today, our challenge is with so many Western kind of culture people, and then there is so much of domination in the field by Western people. So in this context, in this situation also, how we can survive and how we can show our research as a very high quality one. So in this FDP, for the purpose which I joined, and the objectives which was in fact outlined, looking at the objective of this FDP, which was mentioned as to have better understanding of qualitative method, then the skills of analysis, then theories related to social science and humanities and Indic studies. All these things were very well churned out, and it was very well shown. It has shown us the path that how we can go ahead with our research, with the future perspectives also, and looking at the history. Main thing is history, which we have always lacked in our research. We go in doing so much of broader aspect of studies, but we ignore history. And during this particular FD, I could understand most importantly that how important history is also, when we have to go in a proper order of unfolding the problems for finding some solution, because research is all about solution. And one thing in this particular complete FDP was Tini Goswami, which I can very well mention as a moderator, who has very well giving some popping in questions in such a manner that wherever we like to question for something, like certain things were remaining small aspects, but very well your questions came in, and with that we could get much more ideas, very clarity of the ideas from the speakers. And I'm feeling very, very happy that I got an opportunity to join this. So thank you all very, very much. All the speakers, excellent speakers were there. Excellent kind of moderation, excellent kind of execution, time management, and the discipline in which it was engaged. So thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to speak during this particular valedictory function.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for your kind words. Now I would like to invite Dr. M. Sarnalatha. Ma'am, due to the paucity of time, I'm really sorry. I can only allot you 5 minutes. So could you please unmute yourself? Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And please introduce yourself, ma'am, because I'm sorry, I don't have your bio with me right now.
It's okay. Hello, good evening all. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Okay. Good evening all. This is Dr. Sarnalatha. I am Associate Professor in the Department of Sociology and Social Work of Kakatiya University from Telangana State. At the outset, let me congratulate the organizers, the St. Xavier's College, Bhaktivedanta Research Center, Sri Jagannath Research Center, St. Paul's Cathedral Mission College, Kolkata Society for Asian Studies, Department of Ethnology, History of Religions and Gender Studies, Stockholm University, for conducting this excellent FDP program to enlighten our craving minds for knowledge. Really, from my side, this program is 10 out of 10. And coming to the FDP, the theme of the FDP is on research methods for cultural studies. And any research method objective is to answer one single question, that is the truth. And this truth is varied according to one's perceptions. And in theoretical parlance, it is the perspective of the researcher that interprets the particular phenomena. In realizing truth, we are guided by our constructed cultural environments. Interestingly, this cultural environment plays an important role in shaping our personality. And every iota of thought is influenced by our cultural constructs. Every day, millions of thoughts cross our minds, and these thoughts take shape through our social actions. And these social actions are guided by our rational choices that are posited by the Max Weber. And Durkheim's collective consciousness that explains about the set of shared beliefs, ideas, attitudes, and knowledge that are common to a social group or society. My point in quoting all these things is that in order to understand the society or a culture, we need to look at the constructs of the society through the individual's lived experiences at individual level or at collective level. So, while conducting cultural studies, the researcher has to be very much cautious about the norm of objectivity and subjectivity also. This objectivity in research is omniscient, neutral, or detached. But coming to subjectivity, which we use mostly in cultural studies, in doing ethnographic studies, it is something being a subject, narrowly meaning an individual who possesses conscious experiences such as perspectives, feelings, beliefs, and desires. And something being a subject, broadly an entity that has agency, meaning that it acts upon or wields power over some other entity. And another aspect of subjectivity is some information, idea, situation, or physical thing considered true only from the perspective of a subject or subjects. The third one is most dangerous in doing our research. With this, I conclude about the theme, and coming to the main FDP, the importance of FDP, like this. Definitely, these kind of FDPs are really necessary to brush up the stock knowledge of the teachers who constantly contented with their stock knowledge, and this stock knowledge over a period becomes rot. We cannot be a desirable teacher unless we brush up our knowledge and keep abreast with the ongoing research, with the ongoing addition of the knowledge. So these kind of FDPs really necessary, and I hope all other contestants, all other participants also would agree with me. And thank you for giving me this opportunity. And my special thanks to Tini Goswami for excellently moderating all the sessions. And I bow my head with reverence to all the luminaries who shed light on the various aspects of the research methods and also cultural studies and also epistemology and all, whatever not. really this FDP has placed us above a level which we were not before this FDP. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We feel really blessed to have you, and thanks for your nice words and appreciation. Thank you. Thank you so much. Now, I would like to request Orkode Banerjee to share his views, please. Orkode Banerjee, kindly unmute yourself and please introduce yourself. Thank you. Orkode Banerjee, are you there? Would you be able to unmute yourself? I request our technical team to kindly unmute uh, Orkode Banerjee.
Good evening, Professor Goswami.
Good evening.
I'm Orkode Banerjee. I'm a professor at the History Department of St. Xavier's College at the Raghabpur campus. Firstly, I would like to thank all the organizing institutions who made this wonderful and memorable FDP possible. And I'm sure that this has proven to be an extremely valuable experience for all participants. I would like to thank all the respected speakers for their extremely diverse range of presentations. For me, it was an extremely enlightening and instructive experience because by discipline, I study history. I'm a student of history, but the huge range of disciplines which contributed to this FDP allowed me to learn a range of new things, such as, for example, folklore or manuscripts, or about the importance of folk songs. I feel that as our world becomes more and more complicated and we try to broaden our own perspectives to improve our own understanding, such an multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary approach is extremely valuable in informing our own research methodology. All of these presentations were extremely enlightening, but for me, two presentations proved to be highly memorable. I would like to refer to Dr. Srijoni Bhattacharya's lecture on the very first day, Dr. Srijoni Chakraborty's lecture on the dimensions of environmental history in northeastern India. And I feel that what she said about the colonial practices of forest laws and also about the complicated nature of environmental history and how it requires a multidisciplinary approach to understand it fully is something that is extremely relevant to us now. One of the aspects of colonial forest policy was how forest was seen as a resource, something to be used and utilized for its value. And in our present time of environmental crisis, of global warming, climate change, and so many other complications that we feel every day, it is important that we understand how such mentalities came to be harmful and how through tackling environmental issues from a multidisciplinary perspective, from understanding not just climatology or botany, but also through ethnography, anthropology, and history, from understanding the perspective of the people of the forest, those people who lived in harmony with nature for thousands of years, we can understand how we can modify our own lives and our consumerist civilization to make it more suitable to a new age. I felt that while we were talking about research methodology and about studying new things, our research methodology is also extremely valuable when it informs our daily lives in every way. And to me, at least, the environmental crisis is something that affects us, every person across the globe, every second. The other presentation that I was extremely captivated by was by Dr. David Haberman, who spoke about being open to difference while studying religion. I feel that since this FDP is taking place in South Asia, which is a region of unparalleled cultural diversity, his repeated emphasis on understanding the other, being open to the other, and trying through informed knowledge and research to overcome difference is something that we absolutely cannot forget. in the present world, there are a range of conflicts. There are many issues of difference. And again, I feel that such a viewpoint, such an outlook, which informs not just research methodology, but the way we live our lives every day, helps us to existence in harmony. I feel that any researcher, while looking at the very complicated range of sources, from archival sources to ethnographic sources, often has the problem of confronting something that looks alien, something that was produced in a cultural context or in a temporal context so different from his or her own that at first he cannot identify with it, he cannot see what it is and how it can convey meaning. Through repeated emphasis on remembering the other, through understanding that our culture or the culture of another person is not universal, but that we all contribute to a global human culture, we can try to overcome this unbridgeable temporal, spatial, or cultural gap. And again, this can inform both our research methodology and our everyday lives. These, I feel, were extremely valuable lessons that I took away from this FDP, as well as the varied lessons given by all the learned scholars on how to tackle different types of problematic issues. Thank you very much, Professor Goswami, for letting me address this August gathering.
Thank you, Mr. Arkodev Banerjee, for your precious views. And I would like to request Dr. Akanksha Nathani to share your views, please. Dr. Akanksha, are you there? And
yes, am I audible? Am I
yeah,
audible?
You are.
Yeah. Thank you very much, first of all, for the opportunity to address this August gathering, and congratulations to all the organizers for such a wonderful faculty development program. I am Dr. Akanksha Natani, and I've done my PhD from JNU New Delhi, and right now I'm working as an assistant professor in St. Xavier's College, Jaipur. And I understand that how difficult it is to organize such academic programs in these unprecedented times. Of course, we have like internet, and then it's easier to stay connected, but everything comes in a package. So there are a number of challenges also. The biggest challenge that we face is basically the bombardment of information, also called as like information pollution, and recently a meme got viral which said death by webinars, and I must tell you, in the middle of so many webinars, this was like one of the most one of the best sort of faculty development program and online sort of teaching program that I attended. And the kind of subject it covered, the kind of variety of subjects it had, like from feminist research methods to academic study of religion in India, and the kind of geographical dimension it covered, from Northeast to South Asian studies and everything. So the kind of variety of subjects it covered was wonderful, and all the speakers also spoke very well. And we in fact had a session on digital humanities, and I understand that when you are speaking at the end of the some sort of like program, then along with the appraisal you should also give some sort of suggestions, if from the receivers and from the audience perspective. And I believe when if we continue, if you basically plan, and I suggest that you plan the second part of this program because it's so wonderful, then please, the way you had the sessions on digital humanities, I would request you to have a session on digital inclusions and the digital divide, because it's one of the most emerging concern in the social sciences now, and it's becoming very difficult to somehow understand what sort of research methodology should be used to understand the concepts of digital divide and digital inclusion. So that would be great. And also the kind of questions that are emerging, because we addressed that this faculty development program is centered down around the issues of culture. So I believe that the kind of concerns that are emerging on depth of multiculturalism in the times of globalization, and in the times of cosmopolitan cultures, like you're born in one culture and then you go for your studies to some other a country where, or some other state where a different culture is followed, and then you start working in a different cultural under situations, and then you get married in some different culture, something like that. So kind of cosmopolitanism that is emerging all over the world. Then what should be the research methodologies to somehow to understand the questions of belongingness and the question of cultural connotations of nationalism, citizenship, and everything. So, if like I would request all of you to somehow consider the second part of this faculty development program as well, because it was actually very wonderful and include all of these subjects. And last but not the least, I would just request you to somehow because now see, everything comes in a package, and we are also we have the advantages and disadvantages of staying connected through internet. So if we can request all our speakers to give us some reading materials, so that we can, if we are interested in some specific subject, then we can somehow read more about that. That's all. And I would actually like to congratulate the moderator, Dr. Tini Goswami, as well. You've done it so well. It's so inspiring also. Thank you very much again for the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Akanksha. We will surely work on your suggestions, and we can try to have one more FDP in 2021. And I will also request all the speakers so that if they can send some materials which we can circulate to all of our participants. And now I would like to request Reverend Father Johnson Padiera, SJ, Vice Principal, St. Xavier's College, Autonomous Kolkata, Raghabpur campus, to deliver the valedictory address. Father, are you there? Good evening, Father.
Yes, good evening. Dear respected Reverend Dr. Dominic Xavier SJ, Principal, St. Xavier's College, Autonomous Kolkata, Professor Bertram De Silva, Vice Principal, Arts and Science Departments, distinguished academic collaborators, leading academicians and researchers and participants. I would like to thank and congratulate all of you for your kind support and for your participatory involvements that have made this 5-day international online faculty development program on research methods in social sciences with a focus on cultural studies a grand success. The nationwide enthusiastic response to FDP has marked remarkable academic achievement, which was possible because of your great support and solidarity among the academic fraternity, even in this COVID pandemic situation we go through. I am sure that the confluences of various thoughts and discourses that we have been discussing and debating, questioning on these 5 days on social sciences and cultural studies would have surely enriched our participants. So now they can rethink, resituate, and reconstruct their research methodologies for the same. I believe that this academic endeavor has definitely served the purpose of exchanging our views, ideas, opinions, and perspectives that have gone deeper into our intellectual pursuit and higher in the realms of seeking knowledge for our academic enrichment. I once again thank and congratulate all of you on behalf of our principal, Father Dominic Xavier SJ, St. Xavier's College, and all the collaborating institutes. They have been very supportive and very cooperative for organizing this 5-day seminar. I wish you all a grace-filled, happy and prosperous New Year 2021. Thank you, and may God bless all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Father, for your kind words, and please bless us always. And thank you so much. Thanking you once again. Sure. And now I would like to request Professor Debaruti Ganguly, Assistant Professor, St. Xavier's College, Autonomous Kolkata, Department of History, Raghabpur campus, to give the final vote of thanks. Professor Debaruti, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Yes. Can you unmute yourself? Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes. A very good evening to all. As we have reached to the last leg of the 5-day international online faculty development program, I want to extend my sincere gratitude and heartfelt thanks to all the dignitaries present here and who had made this event a successful one. We are thankful to our respected Father Principal Dominic Savio SJ, our Vice Principal Raghabpur Campus, Reverend Father Johnson Padiara SJ, Vice Principal Arts and Science Departments, Professor Bertram De Silva, Dr. Ayan Chandro, Academic Council Secretary, Assistant Controller of Examinations, Dr. Arup Kumar Mitro, St. Xavier's College, Kolkata. We are also thankful to the institutions who have for their cooperation in organizing this event. They are the Bhaktivedanta Research Center, Kolkata, Sri Jagannath Research Center, St. Paul's Cathedral Mission College, Kolkata, Kolkata Society for Asian Studies, the Department of Ethnology, History of Religions and Gender Studies, Stockhome University. Thank you very much, Dr. Shumanto Rudro, for your extended help and participation. Academic Dean, Bhaktivedanta Research Center, Kolkata, Dr. Ferdinando Sardella, Associate Professor, Department of Ethnology, History of Religions and Gender Studies, Stockhome University, Dr. S.K. Makbul Islam, Associate Professor, Department of Bengali, St. Paul's Cathedral Mission College, Kolkata, and also is the founder of Sri Jagannath Research Center, Kolkata, Dr. Shormishta De Basu, Secretary, Kolkata Society for Asian Studies, Dr. Shantanu De, Associate Professor, Department of History, Ramkrishna Mission Vidya Mandir, Belur, Dr. Abhishek Ghosh, Assistant Professor, Department of Comparative Indian Language and Literature. And we are privileged to have the distinguished speakers with us. And it was a great privilege to have you with us. And you have highlighted on the various aspects of the religion and culture, their interconnective approaches, and also their relation with the methodological aspects. We are happy to see the overwhelming response coming from the participants, which I'm sure had encouraged our erudite speakers to share their views here. And we are also very much thankful for the head of the history department, Dr. Tinni Goswami, for her brilliant moderation and initiative in organizing this platform. And the aim of this platform was to provide a critical approach towards methodological analysis. And I'm very much hopeful that our effort had yielded the positive results for our participants. So on behalf of our department, I thank again you all for bearing with us and hope we can soon overcome this gloomy situation and we can enjoy again our familiar methods of learning procedure and activities. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Professor Debaruti, and I would wholeheartedly like to thank Dr. Partho Pratim Ghosh, Coordinator IQAC. Without your help, sir, we wouldn't be able to have this program. So kindly accept my thanks, and we are indebted to you. And also the students of microbiology department, Anonna and her team, like how you all helped us while having the program, like the FDP program, the technical team. And sir, thank you so much. And Parthopratim sir, can you hear me? Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for all of your help and support. And I would also like to thank Shrimanti Ghoshal, Research Fellow, BRC, for every time helping us to conduct the program smoothly, and also Mr. Ramkrishna Mundal, Technical Head, ECS, Belur, for giving us that kind of technical support whenever we needed. So now I will end the program. So Parthopratim sir, are you also you are
Yeah.
here? So sir, would you like to make some concluding remarks before the end of this program? So
Oh, thank you, ma'am. Actually, I've got very little to add to whatever our distinguished speakers have said, and really, it has been an overwhelming experience, this 5 day faculty development program. And we are thankful to our principal, Reverend Dr. Dominic Savio, also to our vice principal, Reverend Johnson Padiara, Professor Bertram Da Silva, and most of all to you for taking this outstanding initiative. So we are very thankful. And I only wish that we have more and more such events under your guidance. So thank you very much. I would also like to thank each of the dignitaries, all the speakers, for their precious time and their resources, which they have kindly shared with us. So this has been a really memorable experience. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
thank you, sir. Thank you for your kind words. And now I would like to end the program. And before ending the program, my special thanks to Mr. Anurag Parikh, the the administrative dean, BRC. Sir, we like to thank you for your help, what we got through these 5 days. And lastly, to all the participants for your cooperation, for your patience, and to our respected speakers. So I think that we are dragging the session. So hope that all of us will be having a great year ahead in 2021. Thanking you once again. Good night. And the link for feedback will be activated till 12 p.m. tomorrow in the afternoon, and we have already sent the link in the chat box. So hope all of you got the link. Thank you again and good night.